Hey everyone, tonight we journey back, far back, before Rome had its Colosseum, before the first stones of the Parthenon were laid. We're heading to the banks of a wide, sacred river, under a sky hazy with incense and cooking smoke. You can almost smell it, a mix of marigolds, damp earth, and something sharply medicinal. This is ancient India, around 800 BC, and trust me, while it's a cradle of profound philosophy and mathematics, it's also a place where a simple infection could end you. You probably wouldn't survive this, not with your modern sensibilities and your reliance on antibiotics. A paper cut here isn't an inconvenience, it's a potential death sentence. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's been a while, and it's good to see you. If you feel like it, post your location and your local time in the comments below. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on a dusty, crowded street. The city is Kashi, known today as Varanasi, and it is already ancient, even to the people living here. It feels less like a city and more like a living organism, sprawling along the western bank of the great Ganga River. The air is thick, humid, and impossibly loud. You hear the chatter of a dozen different dialects, the lowing of cattle pulling heavy carts, and the incessant, high-pitched whine of a shehnai, a reed instrument, from a temple courtyard nearby. The sun beats down and you quickly realize that shade is a premium commodity, something to be huddled under in narrow alleyways. This isn't just any city. This is one of the great Mahajanapadas, the 16 great kingdoms of early India. Kashi is the capital of, Kashi, and it's famous for two things: silk and enlightenment. You see evidence of both everywhere. In one stall, men are unspooling shimmering threads of raw silk, dyed in vibrant saffron and indigo. In another, a holy man, his body smeared with ash, sits in silent meditation, oblivious to the chaos around him. This place is a nexus. It's a university town without the university buildings, a religious capital without a central pope. It's where philosophers, ascetics, merchants, and kings come to trade goods, ideas, and spiritual merit. You walk toward the river, dodging a cart piled high with fragrant sandalwood. The famous ghats, the stone steps leading down to the water, are already taking shape. Here, the boundary between life and death is perilously thin. You see pilgrims performing puja, chanting and offering flowers to the river goddess. Further down, smoke rises from a funeral pyre. It's all happening at once, a beautiful and jarring spectacle of existence. This city is a hub of knowledge. Young men, brahmacharis, are gathered under a banyan tree, listening intently as their guru recites verses from the Vedas, the sacred texts. They are learning astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, and medicine. Yes, Kashi is a center for Ayurveda, the science of life. But the medicine practiced here isn't just about herbal teas and balancing your humors, though there's plenty of that. In the quieter, cleaner compounds, away from the immediate crush of the ghats, something revolutionary is happening. This is where the surgeons, the Shalya Chikitsakas, practice their craft. They are a specialized, respected, and slightly feared class. Historians still argue whether the surgical knowledge developing here was a closely guarded secret of a few elite families, or if it was more widely taught in these open-air colleges. What's certain is that the knowledge is practical, born from a world that is, frankly, quite brutal. You see, for all its spiritual beauty, this is a tough place to live. Aside from disease, there's warfare. Kingdoms clash constantly, and then there's the justice system. It's swift, public, and severe. You're jostled by a crowd and follow their gaze. A man is being held down by two guards in the center of a small square. A third man, an executioner, stands over him. The crime? Adultery, theft, defiance of the king. The specific charge doesn't matter to the crowd. They are here for the punishment. And in this era, the punishment is designed to fit the crime by marking the criminal for life. It's a system built on shame. You might think of a flogging or perhaps branding. But here, the favored punishment for certain crimes, especially those considered moral or social transgressions, is something else. It's rhinotomy, the public, judicial removal of the nose. It's a punishment that doesn't kill you. It just ruins you. It leaves you a permanent outcast, a walking advertisement of your shame. You can't hide it. You can't cover it. Everyone for the rest of your life will know what you did. It's a fate that many consider worse than death. It's this specific, gruesome reality that creates a desperate, overwhelming demand. When you take away someone's face, they will give anything, travel any distance, and pay any price to get it back. And in Kashi, a city of seemingly infinite knowledge, someone is listening. Someone is developing an answer. Someone is figuring out how to do the impossible. Build a new nose from scratch. You push through the crowd, drawn by that morbid gravity that pulls all humans toward spectacle. The air has changed. The cheerful market day chatter has died, replaced by a tense, excited murmur. You're in a dusty clearing, and the man you saw is now kneeling, his hands bound tightly behind his back. The guards step away. The executioner, a broad man with a grim, practiced expression, holds a small, curved knife. It's not a clumsy weapon. It's a specific tool for a specific job, and it glints, catching the harsh sunlight. The condemned man is trembling, his pleas for mercy lost in the noise of the crowd. This isn't a hidden act, it's a key part of the judicial system. This is what dharma or law looks like in the town square. You avert your eyes, but you can't block out the sounds. The sharp intake of breath from the crowd, a single choked cry, and then a strange collective sigh. When you look back, it's over. The man is slumped forward, blood covering the lower half of his face. The executioner wipes his blade on a piece of rough cloth and gestures to the guards. His day's work done. The crowd begins to break apart, conversation starting up again, the moment of high drama already passing. The victim is left kneeling for a moment, disoriented and in profound shock. A guard cuts his bonds and shoves him. "Go," he barks, and the man stumbles away, holding his hands to his face, a ghost already, though he's still bleeding. You watch him disappear into an alleyway, and you're left with a cold, sick feeling. You have just witnessed a rhinotomy. This punishment, the cutting off of the nose, was frighteningly common. It's prescribed in ancient legal texts for a surprising variety of offenses. While we often associate it with adultery, a way of defacing someone who had broken the sanctity of a marriage, it was also used for thievery, political dissent, or even lying to a king. The nose was seen as a seat of honor and pride. To remove it was to surgically remove a person's standing in the world. It was a permanent mark of shame, a signal to everyone you met that you were a transgressor, someone outside the bounds of respectable society. This wasn't just punishment. It was social execution. You start to notice them, now that you know what to look for. A beggar huddled by the temple steps, his face a smooth, scarred plain. A woman veiled heavily, not from modesty but from a past she cannot escape. These individuals formed a tragic, unofficial caste. They were the noseless. They were often shunned, unable to get work, unable to marry, forced to live on the fringes. It's a chillingly effective form of social control. This is cancel culture in 800 BC, and the block button is a very real, very sharp piece of bronze. There's no appeal, no new profile you can create. Your identity is permanently mutilated. This practice created an intense, desperate market for a cure. Imagine yourself in that man's position. One moment, you are a part of the world. The next, you are a monster, frightening children, shunned by your family. You would do anything, pay anything, endure any pain to get your face back. You would travel hundreds of miles on foot, begging for scraps just on the rumor that someone somewhere could help. This immense suffering is the soil from which an incredible innovation will grow. Historians still argue whether this punishment was a daily occurrence, as some texts might suggest, or a spectacular, rare warning reserved for high-profile cases to terrify the populace. Was it like a modern parking ticket, handed out constantly, or more like a high-profile treason trial? The truth is likely somewhere in the middle, but its existence, whether frequent or rare, was well known, and the fear of it was a powerful motivator. That fear is what hangs in the air, long after the crowd has dispersed. The threat is real, and as the victim of that day's justice stumbles into the less savory parts of Kashi, he will hear whispers. he will be told by other outcasts in hushed tones that his life isn't completely over. There is a man, a Vaidya, a physician, who lives in a compound just outside the main city. A man who supposedly, miraculously, can give back the face. This rumor seems impossible, a cruel joke played on the desperate. How can anyone give back what has been so decisively taken? But when you have nothing, a whisper of hope is everything. This man's name is Sushruta, and he is, in essence, the father of plastic surgery. His work isn't born from a desire for cosmetic beauty, for a better nose. It's born from this brutal system of justice. It's an act of reconstruction, of defiance, of restoring humanity to those who had it publicly stripped away. And you decide to follow that whisper. You leave the town square, the metallic scent of blood still sharp in the humid air, and follow the rumor. You walk away from the river, leaving the noise of the ghats and the main market behind. The streets become narrower, quieter. The buildings are less about commerce and more about living. You eventually pass through one of the city gates, and the sound of Kashi fades to a persistent, low hum behind you. You are in the suburbs, if such a word even applies. Here compounds are set further apart, separated by groves of mango trees and fields of barley. It's cleaner here. The air is sweeter. You follow a path to a compound enclosed by a simple wooden fence. Inside, it doesn't look like a place of miracles. It looks like a school. A very organized, very clean school. You see a central courtyard with a well. Along the perimeter are several open-air structures, thatched roofs held up by wooden pillars, providing shade. In one, students are grinding herbs with mortars and pestles. In another, an older man is demonstrating how to properly bandage a limb, using a student as a model. Everything is orderly. The ground is swept clean. There are even specific pits dug in the corner for waste, a concept of sanitation that feels strikingly modern. This is the ashram or clinic of Sushruta, and as you watch, you see the man from the square. He is huddled at the gate, still holding his bloody rags to his face, waiting. He is terrified, hopeful, and ashamed. A young student, a shishya, approaches him, speaks to him calmly, and leads him inside to a small, separate hut. After a few moments, another man emerges from the main teaching area and walks toward that hut. This, you realize, must be the master. This is Sushruta. He doesn't look like a miracle worker. He doesn't radiate divine energy or wear the robes of a king. He is a man, perhaps in his middle years, with the keen, observant eyes of a scholar and the steady hands of a craftsman. His expression is one of intense focus, and beneath that, a deep, weary compassion. He has seen this all before. He is the man who has to clean up the messes of the king's justice. His name, Sushruta, literally translates to well-heard or one who has listened well. It's a fitting name for a man who didn't just invent, but who listened. He listened to the wisdom of the Vaidyas before him. He listened to the needs of the desperate patients who came to him, and he listened to the quiet teachings of the human body itself. As you observe him, you are witnessing a legend in his own time. This is the man credited as the father of surgery. While other medical systems, even within Ayurveda, focused on herbs, diet, and spiritual balance, Sushruta championed Shalya Tantra, the science of surgery. He was a radical in his own way. He believed that some ailments simply could not be cured with a potion or a prayer. Sometimes the body was broken, and it needed to be fixed with a tool. This was a practical hands-on approach that was, for its time, revolutionary. He was an empiricist in an age of mysticism. Historians still argue whether Sushruta was a single, brilliant individual, or if the name represents a whole school of thought, a lineage of teachers and students who built upon this knowledge over generations. Was Sushruta the Hippocrates of India, a real person whose teachings were later compiled, or was he more like Homer, a legendary name attached to a collective body of work? For you, standing here in this dusty courtyard, it doesn't really matter. The man you are watching, the acharya or teacher, is the one consolidating this knowledge, perfecting it, and most importantly, writing it down. He isn't just a surgeon, he is a teacher, and his primary mission seems to be the transmission of this precious knowledge. You watch him interact with his students. He is demanding, precise. He doesn't tolerate sloppiness. He is training a new generation of surgeons to handle everything from childbirth to, yes, rebuilding a face. He is creating a standardized system. This is the key. It's not one man's secret trick. It's a method, a replicable, teachable process. He enters the hut where the noseless man waits. You can't follow, not yet, but you can see the students preparing. They aren't just chanting, they are washing their hands, they are laying out sterilized bronze tools. They are bringing in jars of herbal pastes and, significantly, a large flask of strong wine. This isn't a faith healing. This is an operation. The core of his philosophy, as you'd later learn, was that a good physician must be both a scholar and a surgeon. He famously stated that a physician who only knows theory but not practice is like a bird with only one wing, and a surgeon who only knows practice but not theory is no better than a thief or a murderer. He demanded both. His students were expected to know the sacred texts of the Vedas, but they were also expected to know how to stop a wound from bleeding. This fusion of the sacred and the practical is what makes his work so powerful. He is giving this desperate man more than just a new nose. He is giving him back his personhood, his pride. And to do it, he will rely on a text he is in the process of compiling, a monumental work that will outlive him by millennia. While the master is inside that hut, your attention is drawn to the senior students. They are preparing for the day's work, not just for the emergency case of the noseless man, but for all the other patients waiting quietly in the shade. One student, clearly a senior apprentice, unrolls a mat and carefully places a long rectangular bundle upon it. He unwraps a swath of silk to reveal what looks like a stack of dried leaves. This is the book. This is the knowledge. You are looking at a palm leaf manuscript, or talapatra. In this part of the world, paper made from pulp hasn't been invented. The printing press is more than 2 millennia in the future. Knowledge is preserved on these humble, perishable strips of dried, treated palm leaf, etched with a sharp stylus. The student handles this bundle with the reverence you might reserve for a crown jewel, and for good reason. This object is impossibly precious, holding the collective wisdom of generations. This is the Sushruta Samhita, the compendium of Sushruta. This is the physical manifestation of the master's well-heard wisdom. It's not one book. It's a vast encyclopedia, a massive one. If it were translated into a modern paperback, it would span multiple volumes. This compendium, as it will be known to history, is divided into 184 chapters. It's a complete system of medicine. It lists 1,120 different illnesses, from fevers and digestive complaints to serious diseases and mental disorders. It meticulously details over 700 medicinal plants, explaining how to find them, when to harvest them, and how to prepare them into kalpas, preparations like powders, infusions, and oils. It's an entire pharmacopoeia. It covers toxicology, pediatrics, geriatrics, and even what we would now call spiritual and mental health. But tucked within this enormous body of work is the part that makes this ashram famous: the surgical sections, the Shalya Tantra. This is where Sushruta, or the school built around his name, truly breaks new ground. He describes 121 different types of surgical instruments. He details 300 different surgical procedures. He classifies human bones, discusses anatomy, and lays out, step by step, how to manage everything from a simple cut to a complex intestinal obstruction. And of course, it contains the chapter on Nasika Sandhana, the joining of the nose. You watch the student trace the lines of text with his finger, his lips moving as he silently recites the procedure. He is double-checking the steps. This isn't guesswork. It's not a risky improvisation. It is a standardized, repeatable, taught procedure. The Samhita is a textbook, a surgical manual, and a code of ethics all in one. This is what separates Sushruta from 1,000 other folk healers. He isn't just practicing medicine, he is defining it. He is creating a system. And here lies a great debate. Historians still argue whether this colossal work was the product of a single, superhumanly brilliant mind. One man named Sushruta, writing furiously in 800 BC, or if it's an accretion of knowledge, a living text compiled and added to by his school over several centuries, only later being unified under the founder's name. The sheer breadth of the knowledge, covering every conceivable aspect of medicine, suggests the latter. It feels like the work of a lineage, a Sushruta school that dominated medical thought. But it all started somewhere. It started with a master who insisted on observation, practice, and, most importantly, documentation. This flimsy bundle of leaves is a radical document. It's empirical. It says, if you see this symptom, this is the cause. This is the tool you will use. This is how you will cut. This is how you will stitch. This is what you will feed the patient afterward. It is a stunning rejection of the idea that all illness is merely the work of angry gods or bad karma, though it certainly acknowledges those beliefs. Sushruta's text essentially says that while the gods may be fickle, the human body is a mechanism. It can be understood and it can be repaired. The fragility of the medium itself is a quirky, tragic fact. These palm leaves are food for insects and victims of moisture. They crumble. The reason this knowledge seems to vanish and reappear in history is because its physical form is so ephemeral. The Samhita you are looking at is probably a copy of a copy of a copy, painstakingly transcribed by a student from a decaying older manuscript. The survival of this text into the modern era is a sheer miracle, a testament to the dedication of the students who saw it not just as a book, but as a sacred duty to preserve. The senior student nods, having found the passage he was looking for. He re-rolls the manuscript, wraps it in the silk, and stands. He and the other students now begin to move with purpose. They know the theory. They have the manual. But the Samhita is very, very clear on this point. Theory is not enough. You can't just read about surgery. You have to do it. And Sushruta has a very specific, very intense training regimen for that too. You watch the students. They move with a quiet competence that speaks of long practice. These aren't just casual helpers. They are disciples in the truest sense of the word. And they didn't get here by accident. You couldn't just walk in off the street, pay a tuition fee, and sign up for Surgery 101. To be a student of Sushruta, you had to be chosen. The selection process described in the Samhita is incredibly stringent. Sushruta was, to put it mildly, a picky teacher. He specifies that a prospective student must come from a good family, ideally one from the upper castes. But lineage wasn't enough. The student had to be intelligent, with a sharp memory and a calm temperament. He needed to have courage, purity of mind and body, and a strong constitution. He couldn't be clumsy or, heaven forbid, squeamish. Sushruta was essentially vetting for a combination of intellectual brilliance and the steady hands of a concert pianist. No shaky-handed applicants, please. Once a boy was accepted, usually at a young age, he would be formally initiated in a ceremony called the Upanayana. This was a sacred ritual, complete with offerings to the gods, a sacred fire, and the formal acceptance of the boy by the guru. And it was here, before he ever picked up a tool, that the student would take an oath. You've probably heard of the Hippocratic Oath that famous pledge doctors in the West take. Well, this oath, the Sushruta Oath, predates it by centuries, and it's just as profound. As you watch these young men work, you can see the oath reflected in their disciplined movements. They would have sworn in front of that sacred fire to devote themselves wholly to their patients. They swore to speak nothing but the truth, to cause no harm, and to never neglect a patient. They pledged to be obedient to their master, to live a life of purity and self-control, and critically, to maintain patient confidentiality. What happened in the surgical hut stayed in the surgical hut. This commitment to privacy is staggering for its time, a recognition that a patient's suffering was their own, not a source of public gossip. After the oath, the real work began, and it was a grind. The training was a full-time residential apprenticeship. These students lived here in the ashram with their master. Their life was the ashram. The training lasted for years. Some texts suggest 7, others as many as 10 or 12. Historians still argue about the exact duration and the social structure of this education. Was it a fixed curriculum of 7 years, like a modern medical degree, or was it simply, you are done when the master says you are done? Given the master-disciple relationship, the latter seems more likely. You graduated when Sushruta himself, the man with the impossibly high standards, looked at your work and finally nodded. The training was divided into two distinct parallel tracks, theory and practice. The theory part was brutal memorization. You see that senior student who was just consulting the palm leaf manuscript? He wasn't just reading it. His job, and the job of every student here, was to memorize the Sushruta Samhita. All of it. All 184 chapters. Thousands upon thousands of shlokas, verses. They had to be able to recite from memory the exact procedure for setting a bone, the 700 herbs in the pharmacopoeia, and the precise description of the 121 surgical tools. The Samhita was their operating system, and it had to be loaded directly into their brains. But as Sushruta himself said, theory alone makes you a one-winged bird. So, parallel to this intense memorization was the practical training. And this is what set his school apart. Sushruta was a firm believer in simulation. He was not going to let these students practice their fumbling first cuts on a living, breathing, and, most importantly, paying patient. That would be madness. No, his students spent years practicing on non-human models. It was a gradual, meticulous process designed to build muscle memory and perfect dexterity. You watch a younger student over in a shaded corner, completely absorbed. He is holding a small, sharp knife. In front of him is not a person but a large, firm gourd. He is practicing making incisions. He is learning how to control the depth, the angle, the pressure. He is learning the feel of a blade cutting through tissue, or at least the closest approximation he can get. This is SimLab 800 BC. They would practice on a whole range of objects. They would practice suturing on pieces of cloth or animal hide. They would practice bloodletting on the veins of dead animals. They would practice probing on hollow bamboo shoots. This hands-on simulated training was a non-negotiable part of the curriculum. Only after a student had mastered the gourd, mastered the cloth, and mastered every other simulation would he even be allowed to assist the master in a real procedure. The students you see moving around the compound preparing for the noseless man's operation are the senior residents. They have put in their years. They know the Samhita backward and forward. They have sutured more gourds than they can count. They are trusted. But even then, you notice it is Sushruta himself who will perform the main surgery. The students will assist. They will hand him tools, they will manage the wound. But the critical artistic part, the reconstruction of the face, is the master's domain. The privilege of even touching a patient was the final hard-won prize of a decade of relentless, grueling, and sacred work. The students are ready. The master, Sushruta, has finished his consultation. The patient, the man from the square, has been given some time. He's been cleaned. His terror has subsided into a numb, desperate hope, and he has agreed to the procedure. It's time. You follow as two senior students lead the man, not into one of the open-air teaching pavilions, but to a separate, enclosed structure. This is the Shalyagriha, the surgical house. This is the ancient operating theater. Forget any image you have of a grand, tiered European theater where hundreds of students watch a bloody spectacle. This is the opposite. It is a simple, solid, windowed room, probably built of sturdy wood or well-daubed mud brick. It's separated from the other buildings, and you notice immediately that the ground around it is swept bare. There's no refuse, no animal droppings, no casual foot traffic. The Samhita is explicit. The surgical house must be built in a clean, auspicious, and well-chosen location, free from smoke, dust, excessive heat, and noise. It must, Sushruta insists, be sheltered from the view of the common folk. This isn't a show, it's a sanctuary. As you step inside, the first thing that hits you is the smell. It's not the metallic, sterile smell of a modern hospital. It's a pungent, aromatic, and surprisingly clean scent. It smells of resin, burnt herbs, and something faintly like mustard. This is the smell of ancient asepsis. Sushruta was, in a word, a clean freak. His compendium lays out a strict protocol for preparing the Shalyagriha before any patient is brought inside. The room, it dictates, must be thoroughly fumigated. This isn't a ritual to invite the gods, though it probably has that spiritual overtone. It's a practical, chemical process. Students would burn specific substances: gugalu, a fragrant resin from the myrrh family; vacha, sweet flag; white mustard; and leaves from the nimba, neem, tree. We now know that many of these, especially neem and mustard, have powerful antimicrobial, antibacterial, and antifungal properties. Sushruta, through centuries of trial and error, had discovered a form of chemical and vapor sterilization. He was fumigating the room to kill the invisible agents of disease, even if he didn't call them germs. The room itself is sparse. There is no clutter. The Samhita advises that it should be spacious and not drafty. The floor is likely packed earth, but it's been swept and possibly even treated. In the center is the operating table, which is not a table at all, but a shaya, a low wooden couch or bed, sturdy and wiped clean, set at a height that is comfortable for the surgeon, who will likely be sitting on a stool. Light is critical. You see wide windows, perhaps covered with thin oiled cloth or fine screens to let in light but not insects. If the light is poor, or if the surgery is at night, students are stationed to hold deepas, brightly burning oil lamps, filled with clean oil to minimize smoke. The goal is visibility. The surgeon must see what he is doing. The patient is led to the couch. He's already been prepared. He has been bathed. The Samhita recommends that his hair and beard be clipped short. He has likely been fed a very specific light meal. Sushruta knew better than to operate on a full stomach. And most importantly, he has been given a copious amount of strong wine, perhaps mixed with a sedative herb like cannabis, vijaya. He is intoxicated, his senses dulled, but he is not, by any stretch of our modern imagination, anesthetized. He will be awake. He will feel this. The wine is there to dull the shock and, frankly, to make him compliant. Sushruta and his senior assistants enter. They too are prepared. They have washed their hands and arms. They are wearing clean, fresh garments of white cotton. Their hair is tied back. The master's demeanor is, as the Samhita demands, calm, courageous, and decisive. His hands are steady. Now, the final preparations. The patient is positioned on the couch. The Samhita specifies that the patient should lie facing east, and the surgeon should sit facing west. This brings us to a fascinating scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether this intense focus on fumigation, cleanliness, and even the direction the patient faced was based on an empirical understanding that hygiene prevented infection, or if it was primarily a ritualistic purification. Was burning neem a chemical process, or was it an appeal to the gods to ward off healing, destroying demons? The most likely answer is yes. It was both. In the ancient mind, the practical and the magical were not separate. What worked, fumigation, was obviously pleasing to the gods, and what was pleasing to the gods obviously worked. The ritual was the sanitation, and the sanitation was the ritual. Two students unroll a clean silk cloth next to the couch. On it, they begin to lay out the tools. They are not dumped in a pile. They are arranged, in order. The operation is about to begin. The room is quiet, tense, and smells of herbs and wine. This is not a butcher shop. It is a controlled, methodical, and sacred space of healing. You move in closer, your curiosity overcoming your apprehension. The students have finished arranging the instruments on the clean silk cloth. This is the Shalya Tantra toolkit, and it is a revelation. The first thing that strikes you is the sheer number and variety. This isn't a simple kit with one knife, one needle, and one clamp. This is a comprehensive, specialized, and highly organized surgical set. The Sushruta Samhita meticulously lists and describes 121 distinct surgical instruments. This is not the work of a tinkerer. It's the arsenal of a master. They are not the cold, sterile stainless steel you're accustomed to. They are made of metal, bronze, and in some cases a very high-quality iron or black metal, IS. They are polished to a mirror shine, catching the light from the oil lamps. Sushruta was insistent on this. A tool, he taught, must be smooth, without blemishes or nicks, not just because it looks nice, but because it makes for a cleaner cut, and, crucially, it's easier to clean. No microscopic pits for gunk to hide in. Sushruta, being the supreme organizer that he was, divided his instruments into two broad categories. First, you have the yantras, or blunt instruments. There are 101 of these, and they are the grasping tools of the trade. They are forceps, clamps, probes, speculums, and tubes. They are for holding, pulling, retracting, exploring, and draining. Then you have the shastras, the sharp instruments. There are about 20 of these, and they are the cutting tools. The scalpels, knives, lancets, and needles. This is the business end of the kit. But what makes you lean in, just baffled by the ingenuity, is the design. You look at the yantras, the forceps in particular. They aren't just generic pliers. Their mouths, the gripping ends, are shaped like the mouths of animals and birds. This is the quirky, brilliant tidbit that defines Sushruta's toolkit. He instructs the shilpins, the craftsmen, to model these tools on the forms of nature. And it's not for decoration, it's for function. You see a long, slender forceps with a delicate, curved tip. Its name, the Kankamukha yantra, means the heronbeak forceps. What better tool in the world for reaching deep into a wound to extract a tiny embedded splinter or a sliver of bone? You see a heavier, more robust clamp with serrated interlocking teeth. This is the Simamukha, the lion mouth clamp, designed for grasping a piece of muscle or tough tissue that absolutely must not slip. There are others: the crow beak, the wolf jaw, the hawk beak, each one perfectly ergonomically evolved over millions of years by nature and now adapted by Sushruta for his surgical house. It's a bit intimidating. You're suddenly very glad you're just an observer and not the one on the table about to be gently held by the Simamukha. This has, of course, sparked a debate. Historians still argue whether these animal mouth descriptions in the Samhita were meant to be literal, that the tools were truly sculpted to look like a heron's head, or if they were simply poetic, mnemonic devices. Were they just names to help the students remember use the strong one, lion here, and use the delicate one, heron there? But as you look at the objects lying on the silk, the craftsmanship is undeniable. They really do look like stylized beaks and jaws. It seems nature in this case was the ultimate R&D department. Then you turn your eyes to the shastras, the sharp tools. They are terrifyingly beautiful. You see various scalpels. There is the mandalagra, or round-tipped blade, and the vridipatra, the leaf-shaped blade. The Samhita is obsessive about their quality. They must be, it commands, sharp enough to split a human hair. The handles are made of wood or horn, grooved for a perfect, non-slip grip. The master surgeon must hold the tool as if it is an extension of his own finger. These tools are precious, and their care is a sacred duty. This isn't the kind of toolkit you buy from a big-box hardware store and let rust in the garage. After every procedure, the Samhita dictates, the tools must be scoured clean, often using hot water and alkaline pastes made from plant ash. They are then sterilized either by the same herbal fumigation that cleans the room or by being passed through a clean flame. Finally, they are wiped with a clean cloth, oiled and stored in individual pouches of silk or cotton, and then placed in a custom-built wooden case. You realize your modern multi-tool, with its tiny, wobbly pliers and a questionable little knife, is just a sad, uninspired descendant of this incredible set. From this gleaming, deadly arsenal, Sushruta selects his primary instrument for the task at hand. It is a vridipatra, the leaf-shaped scalpel. It is perfectly balanced. He also picks up a long, smooth, stiff leaf, a pattern. The patient, his face now cleaned and his senses thoroughly dulled by the wine, lies as still as he can. The students are tense and silent. The master is calm. He holds the leaf against the man's cheek, then against his forehead. He is measuring. The operation is about to begin. Sushruta is not a man who guesses. That leaf in his hand is his blueprint. You watch as he meticulously uses it to measure the defect on the patient's face. He needs to know the precise dimensions of what was taken. Then, he transfers this measurement, this pattern, to the patient's forehead. He's not just cutting a random patch of skin. He's harvesting a custom-shaped piece perfectly sized to cover the wound. This is the Nasika Sandhana, the joining of the nose, and you are about to witness the birth of plastic surgery. This is the forehead flap technique, a procedure so ingenious that it will be lost, rediscovered, and renamed 2.5 millennia later as the Indian method. The patient is now being held down, firmly. 2 students, one on each side, grip his arms and shoulders. Another student gently but immovably holds his head. The wine has done its work. The man is in a dull, intoxicated haze, but the body will still fight what the mind cannot comprehend. This is the brutal reality of pre-anesthetic surgery. It is a controlled, consensual trauma. Sushruta takes a deep breath. His hand, holding that razor-sharp Vridipatra scalpel, is perfectly still. He places the blade against the man's forehead, just above the brow line. Then, in a series of swift, confident, and impossibly precise motions, he makes the incision. He cuts the exact shape he patterned from the leaf. But here is the absolute world-changing genius of the procedure. He does not cut the patch off. He leaves it attached. He cuts a U-shaped flap, leaving the bottom of the U, the strip of skin right between the eyebrows, intact. This isn't a graft, it's a pedicle flap. That attached strip, the pedicle, is the lifeline. It's a bridge of flesh that will continue to supply blood, oxygen, and life to the flap of skin. Sushruta instinctively, or through brilliant observation, understood that a piece of dead skin would just rot. But a piece of living skin, that might just work. You can't help but wince. The patient groans, a deep guttural sound, his body tensing against the student's grip. This is a level of agony that's hard to watch. But Sushruta is already moving. He cannot afford to be slow. He must be, as the Samhita demands, swift and unhesitating. This is probably the one time in your life you're grateful for a surgeon with ice in his veins. Now you have a patient with a nasal cavity and a living flap of skin hanging down from his forehead. The next step is just as grim. The original wound, the stump of the nose, is a mess of scarred tissue from the executioner's blade. You can't attach new skin to old scar tissue and expect it to heal. So, Sushruta must freshen the edges. He takes his scalpel again, and with delicate, precise cuts, he slices away the old, healed-over rim of the nasal opening, exposing fresh, raw, bleeding tissue. It's the "you have to break it more to fix it" school of medicine, which anyone who's ever tried to repair a crumbling wall knows all too well. Now, the two raw surfaces are ready to meet. Gently, Sushruta takes the living flap of skin from the forehead. He pivots it on its stalk, turning it 90 degrees, and lays it down over the bleeding, open nasal cavity. He has in one motion moved a piece of the man's forehead to become his new nose. It's audacious, it's bioengineering. But a nose isn't just a flap of skin. It has structure. It has holes. How do you stop it from just healing into a shapeless lump? Sushruta has an answer for that too. He takes two small hollow tubes, nadi. Historians still argue about what these tubes were made of. Were they polished hollow reeds, stiff, rolled-up leaves, sections of bamboo, or even hollowed-out wood? The Samhita isn't specific, but their function is clear. Sushruta carefully inserts these two tubes into the opening, side by side, creating the new nostrils. These tubes serve two purposes. They give the new nose its shape from the inside, and just as critically, they allow the patient to breathe while the whole thing heals. With the tubes in place, Sushruta begins to stitch. He meticulously sews the edges of the forehead flap to the freshened edges of the cheeks and upper lip. And what about that gaping wound on the forehead? The place where the flap came from? You can't just leave a big hole in someone's head. That seems like a bad review waiting to happen. Sushruta addresses this too. He pulls the edges of the forehead wound together as much as he can and sutures them. Or if the gap is too large, he packs it with antiseptic pastes and bandages it. This wound will heal, but it will leave a scar. A prominent vertical scar right in the middle of the forehead. In a strange twist of fate, this scar would become a badge of honor. The unmistakable signature of the Indian surgeon, a sign that this person had been given back their face. You are mercifully just a silent observer. The man on the table is not so lucky. You watch his knuckles, gripped by his own hands, turn bone white. His entire body is a single, rigid line of tension. He is making a sound, a low, continuous moan that seems to come from the very center of the earth. He is conscious. He is feeling this. This is the part of the story we tend to gloss over, the part our modern minds, cushioned by ether and propofol, simply refuse to compute. How could anyone endure this? The answer is twofold. They had no choice, and they had a little help, though not nearly enough. Let's talk about the anesthesia of 800 BC. As you saw, the primary agent was wine, and we are not talking about a delicate Agedanoke vintage. This was likely a strong, thick, and probably not very pleasant rice or fruit wine, given in quantities that would be considered dangerously excessive today. The goal wasn't a pleasant buzz. The goal was obtundation, to dull the senses, slow the reactions, and most importantly, cloud the memory. The man on the table is, to use a technical term, 3 sheets to the wind. But wine alone isn't enough to stop the kind of screaming, nerve-shredding agony caused by a scalpel carving up your face. The Samhita and other Ayurvedic texts mention other substances. The most prominent one is Vijaya, or cannabis, yes, hemp. It was a well-known medicinal plant, used as a muscle relaxant, a sleep aid, and a potent analgesic. The patient would have likely been given a strong preparation of it, perhaps as a smoked resin, or more likely, mixed into a bong-like drink with the wine. This combination of alcohol and cannabinoids would create a powerful dissociative state. The pain is still there, a bright, flashing signal of biological distress, but the mind is somewhere else. It's muffled, as if it's happening to someone else, or in another room. This is the best they can do. It's not about eliminating the pain, it's about managing the patient. And this is where the scholarly debate comes in. Historians still argue about the true pharmacology of the ancient operating theater. Was the cannabis preparation sophisticated enough to provide genuine, effective pain relief? Or was its primary role psychological? Was it meant to make the patient calm and compliant rather than actually numb? Some texts also hint at other, more esoteric preparations, perhaps from plants like henbane or other nightshades, which could induce a more profound, delirious stupor. But these were dangerous, the line between sedation and poisoning being terrifyingly thin. Sushruta, being a cautious and empirical man, likely stuck to the two he knew worked: wine for the mind and hemp for the nerves. But no amount of herbal remedy can stop a conscious body from reacting to being cut. And this is where you see the quirky, and frankly horrifying, fringe tidbit of ancient pain management. It's the students. The 2 assistants holding the patient's shoulders and the one holding his head are not just there for moral support. They are the physical restraint system. They are the real anesthesia. When Sushruta's scalpel cuts, the patient's body will arch off the table. His head will try to twist away. His arms will flail. It is the student's job to ensure that he does not move. Not 1 centimeter. The surgeon's precision is useless if the canvas is thrashing. The patient is, in essence, in a pharmacological straitjacket created by wine and hemp, and a physical one created by the sheer, brute force strength of the surgical team. The patient's job, in this terrible pact, is simply to endure, to travel to that place in the mind that the wine and hemp have opened up and to stay there. The surgeon's job is to be fast. This is why the Samhita prizes a surgeon who is swift. This isn't just about efficiency, it's an act of mercy. Every second the surgeon shaves off the procedure is a second less of unendurable agony for the patient. You now understand the years of practice on gourds. You don't get to hesitate or rethink when your patient is conscious and being held down by 2 large men. You must be perfect, and you must be perfect now. You watch Sushruta tie the final stitch. His movements have been fluid, economical, and incredibly fast. The patient is soaked in sweat, his breathing ragged. He is trembling violently, in the throes of deep shock. But he is alive. And he did not move. The students gently, slowly, release their grip, their own arms aching from the strain. The master nods, a grim sign of approval. The worst is over. The surgical trial has ended. The healing trial is just about to begin. The man on the table has just walked through a valley of fire, and has done so, awake. You let out a breath you didn't realize you were holding. The patient, trembling and pale, is now being gently attended to by the students who are applying soothing antiseptic pastes. The master, Sushruta, is cleaning his Vridipatra scalpel. His hand, you notice, is as steady as it was before he made the first cut. There isn't a trace of a tremor, no sign of the profound human drama he just orchestrated. This, you realize, is not just a matter of a calm temperament. This is the result of training. The scene you just witnessed, the absolute necessity for speed, for precision, for a hand that does not hesitate while a man is held down conscious, is the single greatest argument for Sushruta's entire educational philosophy. It's the why behind that student you saw earlier, the one in the courtyard practicing on a gourd. Sushruta was not a man who believed in learning on the job. He would have considered it a moral abomination, a betrayal of the oath his students took. The living patient was not a practice dummy. The living patient was the final exam, and you were not allowed to take it until you had passed every other test 1,000 times. So you drift back out into the courtyard, into the shaded areas of the ashram, and you look at the students' practice with new eyes. This isn't just homework. This is the forge. This is where the surgeon's hand is separated from the butcher's. The Samhita outlines this training methodology, the yogya, in meticulous detail. Sushruta, the ultimate empiricist, had developed an entire curriculum of surgical simulation. He had looked at the world around him and seen in the humble contents of a vegetable patch a perfect analog for the human body. You watch that young student with the gourd again. He is practicing chadana, incising. The Samhita commands this. It says to practice on pushpaphala, a type of gourd, alavu, the bottle gourd, and large cucumbers. Why? Because the skin of a gourd has a certain tension and thickness. It gives under the knife, but not too much. The student is learning to make a cut of a specific depth, not too shallow, and critically, not too deep. He slices, checks his work, and slices again, hundreds of times, thousands of times. He is engraving the feel of a perfect incision into his muscle memory. In another corner, a different student is doing something else. He has a leather bag, perhaps a wineskin, filled with water and mud to a specific consistency. He is practicing badana, draining or excising. He is learning to puncture the bag to drain the contents without slashing it to pieces. He is simulating the lancing of an abscess, learning how to relieve the pressure with a minimal controlled opening. And then there's the truly quirky, incredibly delicate part of the training. You see a student holding a single long lotus stem. He is holding a fine, sharp ara, awl or probe. He is practicing Vyadana, puncturing. The Samhita explains that to learn how to puncture a vein, for bloodletting, a common procedure, the student must practice on the delicate, hollow veins of a water lily stem or on the veins found in the leaves of specific plants. Think about that. The level of dexterity required to pierce one side of a soft, yielding lotus stem without damaging the other side is staggering. From there, they would graduate to the veins of dead animals. Only after mastering this would they ever be allowed to approach a living human vein. Historians, of course, still debate this. Was this yogya curriculum a widely enforced standard, the board certification of 800 BC? Or was it an ideal written down by a master, a standard that only his own elite ashram actually achieved? Given the complexity of the surgeries described, it's hard to imagine they could be performed at all without this rigorous, simulation-based foundation. It seems, as with most things in the Samhita, to be a matter of pure, unadulterated practicality. Sushruta's logic was simple. A surgeon's hand must be an unthinking tool of his will. When he decides to cut 1 inch deep, his hand must cut exactly 1 inch deep, without his brain having to consciously micromanage the pressure. This can only come from one thing: repetition. You watch the students. They are practicing suturing, savana, on pieces of thick cloth, animal hide, and tough plant rinds, learning to make their stitches even and tight. They are practicing bandaging on wooden dolls, learning the complex spiral and reverse spiral wraps for every part of the body. They are even practicing asana, probing, on worm-eaten wood or hollow bamboo, learning to feel their way through a sinus or a fistula by touch alone. This is why Sushruta could be so fast. This is why his hand was steady. He had, in essence, already performed the nasal reconstruction 1,000 times, on a pile of very unfortunate gourds. He had already sutured miles of animal hide. His students, by the time they touched a patient, were not novices. They were, by our standards, seasoned experts. The patient's new nose is in place, a pale, living flap of skin held in position by the 2 breathing tubes. But it's just lying there, a vulnerable puzzle piece. The masterpiece is not yet complete. The final, delicate, and arguably most artistic phase is about to begin. Savana, the art of the suture. This is what will hold the man's new face together while the body performs its slow miracle of healing. You look at the tools again. Sushruta sets aside his scalpel and picks up a suchi, a needle. These are not the mass-produced, disposable, perfectly smooth steel needles of your time. These are precious handcrafted objects. The Samhita describes several kinds. There are straight needles for flat, easily accessible wounds, and then there are the curved ones, shaped, as the text poetically describes, like a bow. These are for difficult, contoured areas, where a straight needle simply can't travel. You watch as Sushruta selects a fine bronze bow-shaped needle. It's sharp, polished, and perfectly suited for the delicate curves of the nostrils and cheeks. Now the thread. What do you use to sew a man's face back together in 800 BC? The Samhita offers a whole menu of sutra, or suture materials, all harvested from the world just outside the ashram walls. This is where surgical necessity meets organic resourcefulness. You see students preparing strands. The Samhita lists several. The most common are tough, fine fibers from plants, sana, hemp, and murva, a plant from the Sansevieria family, the same one that gives us bowstring hemp. These fibers are incredibly strong, rot-resistant, and can be twisted into threads of varying thickness. For tougher jobs like closing a deep muscle wound, they might use snayu, animal sinew, or even guduchi, a climbing shrub whose fibers are remarkably durable. But for the delicate work on a face, they need something finer, something smoother, something that will glide through the skin without tearing. And here you see the quirky tidbit, the premium choice for this kind of cosmetic work. A student hands Sushruta a thread, and you see it's not a plant fiber at all. It's a single glossy black strand of ashvavala, horsehair, specifically hair from a horse's tail. Why horsehair? It's incredibly strong, uniform in thickness, and most importantly, it's non-porous. It's relatively inert. It won't swell with blood or water, and it's less likely to wick bacteria down into the wound. It's the perfect, low-tech, non-reactive suture, and Sushruta is about to use it to rebuild a man's face. Sushruta threads his curved needle with the horsehair. He is not just going to punch it through and make a few clumsy knots. The Samhita describes different stitching techniques, different seams for different wounds. There's the gamphita, a continuous stitch like a hem, and the granthi, an interrupted stitch where each one is tied off individually. For the face, where precision is everything, you watch him use a meticulous, interrupted technique. He takes the first stitch catching the edge of the forehead flap, then the edge of the freshened cheek skin. He pulls the two edges together just so, not too tight, which would pucker the skin and kill the tissue, not too loose, which would leave a gap. He brings them together so they kiss perfectly. A student with a smaller clamp holds the knot as Sushruta ties it. It's a tiny, perfect, square knot. Then he cuts the horsehair short, and he begins the next stitch, one after another, dozens of them. Each one is a tiny individual anchor, distributing the tension, creating a perfect everted seam that modern plastic surgeons would nod at in deep appreciation. And here, you're watching a great historical debate in action. Historians still argue about the real reasons for these material choices. Was horsehair chosen for its inert properties, based on generations of observation that these wounds healed cleaner? Or was it just a fringe material, chosen simply because it was fine and strong, and its healing properties were a lucky coincidence? Given the Samhita's obsessive focus on cleanliness, it's hard to believe it was just luck. Sushruta, it seems, knew what he was doing. He knew this material was cleaner than a rough piece of hemp. While the master performs this delicate masterpiece, a senior student is doing the same to the donor site on the man's forehead. He uses a stronger needle and a thicker thread, perhaps of hemp, pulling the gaping wound closed. This is a work of utility, not art. He pulls the edges together with strong, confident stitches, creating the vertical line that will one day become that telltale scar. Finally, Sushruta ties the last horsehair stitch. The new nose is secure. It's pale, slightly swollen, and meticulously sewn, but it's a nose. The patient, still in his twilight of wine and shock, has no idea of the artistry that has just been visited upon him. The sewing is done. But you can't just leave fresh stitches exposed to the humid, dusty air. A student steps forward, holding a small stone bowl. It contains a fine, reddish-brown powder. Sushruta takes a pinch and gently, carefully, dusts it over all the suture lines. This is an antiseptic and styptic powder, likely made from ladra bark, sandalwood, and perhaps a pinch of alum. It's designed to stop any last-minute oozing, to dry the wound, and to form a protective antibacterial crust over the healing incisions. After the powder, a light, clean cotton bandage is applied, just enough to protect the area, but loose enough to let the patient breathe through his new tubed nostrils. The man's face is now a bundle of bandages, his identity given back to him, held in place by the hair of a horse and the wisdom of a master. The horsehair stitches are a testament to a kind of high art. The precision, the fine materials, the understanding of tissue and tension. It's the work of a master craftsman. You're left with the impression that this is the only way a wound could be closed in this ashram. But the Sushruta Samhita is not just a book for the perfect, controlled environment of the Shalyagriha. It is a compendium for all of medicine, including the messy, improvised, and urgent. What you just saw was the couture version of wound closure. But out in the world, in the field, on a farm, or on a battlefield, there isn't always time, nor are there delicate bronze needles and sterile horsehair. You move away from the surgical house, back toward the bustling outer compound. A man has just been brought in, a farmer who had an unfortunate argument with a sickle. He has a deep, 4-inch gash on his forearm. It's bleeding, but it's a clean cut. It needs to be closed. A senior student, not the master, takes charge. He cleans the wound with a harsh herbal wash, and the farmer hisses in pain. The student doesn't reach for the silk pouch of needles. Instead, he barks an order at a younger student who runs off, not to the supply hut, but to a specific, disturbed mound of earth at the edge of the compound's garden. The student returns, carrying a large, broad leaf. On the leaf are several things. They are large, black ants, easily the size of your thumbnail, squirming and snapping their enormous, sickle-shaped mandibles. These are soldier ants, perhaps from the genus Doralus, the kind you instinctively know not to mess with. Your modern brain screams infection, filth, insanity. This cannot possibly be a medical procedure. It looks like the beginning of a very bad pest control problem, but this is the quirky, fringe, and bizarrely brilliant technique that the Samhita also records. It is the living suture, the ant head staple. The senior student takes a pinch of sweet paste and dabs it on his own fingers to attract one of the ants. He picks one up, holding its body carefully. The farmer, who has clearly seen this before, just sighs and holds his arm steady. The student uses his free hand to pinch the edges of the gash on the farmer's arm, pulling the skin taut, bringing the two raw sides of the wound together. Then, he brings the ant. He lowers the angry, squirming insect toward the seam of the wound. The ant, furious at being held and instinctively defending itself, does exactly what the student wants it to do. It bites. It sinks its massive, curved mandibles deep into the flesh, one pincer on each side of the divide, pulling the wound shut in a super-strong biological clamp. The farmer winces, but it's a small pain compared to the gash itself. The ant's jaws are now locked. This is the key. Many species of soldier ants have a locking mechanism in their jaws. Once they bite down, they do not let go, even in death, and the student ensures this. The moment the ant's jaws are sunk deep and the wound is sealed, the student, with a flick of his wrist, twists the ant's body. There is a small, sickening snap. The body is discarded, but the head, and its locked-in-a death-grip mandibles, remains. You are staring at a single black ant head, its antennae still faintly twitching, its jaws acting as a perfect, biological surgical staple. The student doesn't pause. He picks up the next ant and repeats the process, a centimeter down the line. Pinch, bite, twist, snap. He does this again and again, 8 times in a row. When he's done, the farmer's arm is held together by a neat, slightly terrifying row of 8 black ant heads, their jaws all pulling in unison. It looks like something from a nightmare, but you cannot deny the ingenuity. It's a disposable, sterile, in its own way, single-use, prepackaged surgical staple. It's brilliant. This, of course, is a hot topic for debate. Historians still argue whether this was a common Vaidya-approved procedure, or if it was a folk remedy that Sushruta, in his quest for encyclopedic knowledge, simply included as a curiosity. Was this a technique that any soldier or farmer knew? A battlefield trick for when you had nothing else? Or was it a recognized part of the Shalya Tantra? The fact that it's in the Samhita at all suggests it was taken seriously. This wasn't just a fun fact, it was a viable, if extreme, option. The student finishes his work. He applies a simple poultice around the ant heads, but not on them. The farmer is told to leave them in place. In a few days, as the wound begins to heal and the skin softens, the heads will simply fall off on their own. Or a Vaidya can snip the mandibles and remove them. It's so much simpler than horsehair. There's no delicate stitch removal ceremony. You realize you've just seen the two extremes of Sushruta's world. The high-tech, high artistry, time-consuming facial reconstruction, and the low-tech, brute force, incredibly effective field closure. It shows that his philosophy wasn't about one right way. It was about results. Does it work? Is the patient better? Then it is good medicine. Whether it's a thread of horsehair or the disembodied head of an angry insect, the goal is the same: to close the wound, to stop the bleeding, and to let the body heal. This is the practicality that makes the Samhita such an enduring revolutionary document. It's not just for the master surgeon in his clean theater. It's for the student in the field with a bleeding farmer and a handful of ants. The anthead staple is a perfect example of brutal, low-tech efficiency. It's a field medic's solution. But the man with the new nose, resting in the Shalyagriha, is a reminder that Sushruta's ashram wasn't just a trauma center. It was also, in the truest sense of the word, a center for reconstructive surgery. The Samhita wasn't just a manual for saving lives, it was a manual for restoring them. And the nose, while the most dramatic example, wasn't the only part of the face he specialized in. You look around the courtyard at the other patients waiting. Not all of them are hiding a mutilated face. You notice a woman, her clothing fine, suggesting some wealth. She's sitting patiently and her ears are the problem. One of her earlobes is intact, weighted down by a large, beautiful, and incredibly heavy golden earring. The other earlobe is split. It's torn completely in two, the heavy ornament having finally ripped through the delicate flesh, leaving her with two dangling flaps of skin. In ancient India, this was a common and very distressing problem. Large, heavy earrings were not just an accessory, they were a profound statement of wealth, status, and piety. Both men and women of high caste would start stretching their earlobes from childhood, adding progressively heavier ornaments. A long, gracefully distended earlobe, one that perhaps even touched the shoulder, was a sign of beauty, wisdom, and nobility. You see it on statues of the Buddha. It's a mark of an enlightened, aristocratic being. But flesh, as you well know, has its limits. A sudden pull on a heavy earring, an accident, or just the relentless cumulative effect of gravity, could cause the thin strip of flesh to tear. And just like the noseless man, a person with a torn earlobe was marked. It was a cosmetic and social disaster. It was seen as inauspicious, a sign of bad luck, or at the very least a disruption of their aesthetic and social perfection. They were now incomplete. They couldn't wear the matched pair of earrings that signaled their status. And so, they too came to Sushruta. The Samhita has an entire section dedicated to Karna Sandhana, the joining of the ear. This is otoplasty, the medical term for ear surgery, and Sushruta describes it with the same methodical precision as his nasal reconstruction. In fact, he was an obsessive classifier. This is the quirky tidbit that reveals the mind of a true Shastri, a scientist. Sushruta didn't just have one procedure for a torn ear. That would be far too simple. No. His Samhita meticulously identifies and classifies 15 different types of earlobe deformities. He had names for lobes that were torn, lobes that had shriveled, lobes that were too thin, lobes that were too short, and lobes that were just, well, wrong. And for each of these 15 conditions, he had a different, specific surgical approach. This is not a one-size-fits-all clinic. This is bespoke, 800 BC cosmetic surgery. The woman with the torn lobe is finally called over by a senior student. The procedure is, for this ashram, relatively minor. She will not be held down. She will be given wine, but more for her nerves than for overwhelming pain. The procedure is a marvel of delicate tissue engineering. The student examines the torn flaps. Just like with the nose, he can't just sew the two old scarred edges together. They would never join. The Samhita is explicit. The edges must be freshened. He takes a tiny, razor-sharp shastra, and with the deftness of a jeweler, shaves a paper-thin layer of skin off the inside of the two flaps. He is creating a fresh, raw, bleeding surface. Then he brings the two bleeding surfaces together. He holds them, making sure they align perfectly. And then, just like with the nose, he begins to stitch. He uses a fine, curved needle and a delicate thread, perhaps horsehair, perhaps fine, strong silk. He sews the two flaps together, turning the two-lobed snake tongue back into a single, whole earlobe. He bandages it with a clean cotton pledget soaked in a soothing antiseptic oil. The woman is told to return in a few days. The stitches will be removed, and the earlobe will be whole. The Samhita even includes post-operative advice. The lobe must be gently massaged with oil every day to keep it soft and prevent scarring. And then the final, crucial instruction: she must wait. After some time, her newly healed earlobe can be re-pierced. But Sushruta, ever the cautious master, advises that the new piercing be made slightly above the old one, to avoid stressing the new scar tissue. He wasn't just fixing the problem, he was providing a long-term solution. This, of course, raises a fascinating debate. Historians still argue about the social implications of this. Was otoplasty, unlike the necessary rhinoplasty, a luxury procedure? Was this a service reserved for the wealthy elite, the ones who could afford both the heavy gold earrings and the surgical bill to fix what the earrings broke? It's hard to imagine a poor farmer, worried about his crop, spending precious resources to fix a torn ear. This suggests Sushruta's clinic served a diverse clientele. The desperate, shamed outcasts, like the noseless man, right alongside the wealthy, high-status aristocrats who just wanted to maintain their appearance. It was a place where both humanity and vanity could be surgically restored. This practice, this otoplasty, reinforces the central theme of Sushruta's work: wholeness. He viewed the body as a complete, perfectible system. A torn earlobe was a disruption. A missing nose was a catastrophe. Both, in his view, were problems that a skilled surgeon could and should solve. You stand in the ashram courtyard, the scent of fumigating herbs and the low murmur of students reciting verses filling the air. You've just witnessed a level of surgical skill that you would have, just an hour ago, confidently declared impossible for this era. You're operating on the assumption that this is 800 BC. The bronze tools, the Vedic chants, the setting in Kashi, the capital of a Mahajanapada. It all seems to fit neatly into this pre-Buddhist, late Vedic period. But as a silent traveler through time, you have the burden of historical context. You can't just accept it. You look at Sushruta, this man of steady hands and empirical genius, and you try to pin him down. When are you exactly? The 800 BC date is the one often given, the traditional date. It places Sushruta in a legendary, almost mythic time, a contemporary of the earliest great philosophers writing the Upanishads. It puts him a full 3 centuries before Hippocrates in Greece. And in many ways it feels right. The world described in the Samhita, a world of small kingdoms, of specific social castes, of a philosophical framework rooted in the Vedas, is very much the world of 800 BC India. But this is where you run into the favorite and most frustrating pastime of historians, arguing about dates. To a historian, a date is not just a number, it's an argument, a declaration of a whole set of theories. And the date of Sushruta is one of the biggest arguments in medical history. So you stand back and listen to the faint whispers of this 2,000-year-old debate. Historians still argue whether Sushruta was a single, real physician living around 800 BC, or if he lived later, perhaps closer to 600 BC. Some push him even later to 400 BC. The problem is, there is no birth certificate of Sushruta buried in a vault. There are no contemporary chronicles that say, on this day, Sushruta performed a rhinoplasty. All we have is the text, and the text itself is a slippery thing to date. The argument for the earlier date, 800–600 BC, is strong. The language, the style of the Sanskrit, is archaic. It feels Vedic. The society it depicts, as you've seen, is pre-Buddhist. The text doesn't mention Buddha, who would become a major figure after 500 BC. This lack of any Buddhist concepts or terminology is a huge clue. It's like reading a European text that has zero mention of Christianity. You'd know it was written before 300 AD. But the argument for a later date, around 400 BC, is also compelling. The sheer complexity of the surgery, the detailed anatomy, the vast pharmacopoeia, it all seems so advanced. Some scholars argue it must be the product of a later, more developed classical age, perhaps contemporary with the great grammarian Panini. The most likely and most satisfyingly complex answer is that Sushruta is both. Sushruta was probably a real, brilliant master surgeon who lived and taught around 800 or 600 BC. He laid the foundation. He wrote the core text, and then his school, the Sushruta Sampradaya, carried on his work for centuries, adding to the text, refining his techniques, inserting their own discoveries. The Samhita you're looking at, the one on the palm leaves, isn't the first draft. It's the 3.0 or 4.0 version. A living document that was compiled, edited, and finalized sometime around 400 BC, all under the hallowed name of the original master. For centuries, this whole debate was moot, especially in the West. When British scholars in the 18th century were first introduced to the Samhita, they simply laughed it off. A 2,500-year-old text describing 121 surgical tools and nose jobs? Preposterous. They dismissed it as a medieval work, a much later invention, probably written after they had learned from the Greeks. And then we get the quirky, truth is stranger than fiction discovery. In 1890, a British Army officer named Lieutenant Hamilton Bower was in Kashgar, in Chinese Turkestan, modern-day Xinjiang. He was on a mission, but he was also an amateur archaeologist. He was offered a strange ancient book that had been dug up from a ruined Buddhist stupa in the desert. It wasn't paper. It was a bundle of 51 birch bark folios. Bower bought it. This, the Bower manuscript, became one of the most important discoveries in the history of medicine. When it was painstakingly translated and carbon dated, it was found to be from the 4th to 6th century AD. And what did it contain? Among other medical texts, it contained large quoted passages from the Sushruta Samhita. This was the smoking gun. It was the physical, undeniable proof that the Samhita was already considered an ancient canonical and authoritative text by 400 AD, so famous that it was being copied and studied by Buddhists thousands of miles away in the middle of a desert. This one discovery blew the "it's a medieval fake" theory completely out of the water. It proved the Samhita had to be at least from the 400–600 BC period, if not much, much earlier. So as you watch Sushruta, the man calmly instructing a student on how to grind neem leaves, you're left with this beautiful ambiguity. You don't know his exact birthday, 800 BC, 600 BC. It's lost to time, but you know he's real. You know his knowledge is ancient. And that bundle of birch bark found by a British soldier in a desert stupa is the echo that proves his voice is as old as he claims. This text is, without question, one of the Brihat Trayai, or the great 3 founding texts of all Ayurvedic medicine. The exact date becomes almost academic. The knowledge is what matters. And that knowledge, that ability to cut and stitch, implies something even more profound. It implies a deep understanding of what's under the skin. How did he know? You've hit upon the great paradox of Sushruta's genius. How did he know? How did he understand with such confidence that the flap of skin on the forehead was fed by a lifeline of blood? How did he know where to stitch, what to avoid, and how the body was assembled? The Samhita is filled with anatomical lists: 500 muscles, 700 vessels, veins, arteries, and nerves, all classified as siras, 300 bones, 107 vital points, marmas. These are not the guesses of a philosopher, they are the observations of a scientist. But here is the problem. The very culture that produced Sushruta made this knowledge almost impossible to get. In ancient India, The human corpse was a source of profound ritual impurity, a defilement. The Dharma Shastras, the legal and religious texts, were crystal clear. To touch a dead body, let alone cut one, was a sacrilegious act that would make a high-caste physician like Sushruta an outcast. His students, sworn to an oath of purity, would be violating their most sacred vows. So how do you become the father of surgery when you are forbidden from opening the book of the human body? This is where Sushruta's ingenuity leaves the realm of the practical and enters the territory of the truly macabre. He needed to know the anatomy. He had to. His own Samhita states that a surgeon who wishes to acquire a thorough knowledge of anatomy must prepare a dead body and carefully observe and examine all its parts. He is commanding his students to do the one thing their religion forbids. And then he provides the workaround. An ingenious, gruesome, and utterly logical solution to an impossible problem. He outlines a method of dissection without a knife. You follow a senior student, a shishya who is ready for this most secret and profound lesson. He leaves the ashram late at night, under a new moon. He travels to the ghats, but to a secluded part of the river, far from the funeral pyres. He is looking for a specific kind of body, one that has been left in the river perhaps, a victim of drowning, or an outcast with no family to claim them. The Samhita is very specific on the criteria. The body must be complete in all its parts, not missing any limbs. It must be the body of someone who was not excessively old and did not die from a lingering disease, which would have wasted the organs, or from poison, which would have corrupted the flesh. It must be, in short, a perfect specimen. Having procured such a body, the student takes it to an even more solitary place, a hidden inlet or a quiet, still pool. He does not take out a scalpel. Instead, he begins to wrap the body. He encases it in a shroud of munja grass, tough tree bark, and strong hemp fibers, binding it tightly. Then, he places this wrapped bundle into a wooden cage, something to protect it from the river's larger scavengers. And then, he sinks it. He lowers the cage into the still, dark water, weighting it with stones, and he leaves it for 7 days. You can almost feel the slow, patient, terrible work of the river. The water, teeming with microscopic life, begins its process. The tough outer skin softens. The connective tissues, the snayu that hold everything together, begin to dissolve. The flesh, protected from being torn apart by fish, simply softens. It is a controlled aquatic decomposition. On the 7th night, the student returns. He pulls the heavy cage from the water and retrieves the shrouded body. He carries it to a hidden, clean spot. Now, the final, unbelievable step. He unwraps the body. The flesh has, as Sushruta predicted, become soft, almost paste-like. The student does not take out a shastra. He takes out a kurcha, a brush or a whisk, a stiff bundle of ushira grass roots or bamboo fibers, and he begins to scrub. Gently, layer by layer, he rubs away the decomposing tissue. The skin sloughs off, the subcutaneous fat follows, and then the muscles, one by one, are revealed, their origins and insertions clear. He scrubs them away, and beneath he finds the rivers of the siras, the vessels. He follows them. He scrubs further, and he finds the organs, intact but softened, their positions clear. Finally, he reaches the asthi, the skeleton. This is dissection by exfoliation. This has sparked one of the longest-running debates in medical history. Historians still argue whether this water method was actually how Sushruta's school learned anatomy, or if it was a theoretical thought experiment, a clever way to write down a method that wasn't sacrilegious, while in practice they were just performing quick secret dissections by knife. The quirky tidbit that suggests they really used this method is, funnily enough, where the Samhita is wrong. As you noted, the text lists 300 bones, not 206. Why? A modern dissector sees the skull as one large fused bone, or 22. But a student scrubbing away softened tissue from a decomposed head would find the sutures dissolved, and the plates of the skull would fall apart. They would look like separate bones. He would count the 32 teeth as individual bones. He would count the small cartilaginous parts of the ribs and joints, which a knife would cut through but his brush would separate, as distinct bones. His error of 300 bones is the single greatest piece of evidence that he was, in fact, using this very method. He wasn't wrong based on his method, he was just an incredibly precise observer of a decomposed body. This imperfect but brilliant understanding of the body's structure was the entire foundation of his surgery. It was this knowledge that allowed him to build a nose. But it was also part of a much, much larger system. He wasn't just mapping the parts, he was mapping the energy that ran through them. That knowledge of the physical body, learned from the river, was the surgeon's map. But for Sushruta, it was only half the story. You could know where every muscle and bone was, but that was just the architecture of the house. It didn't tell you anything about the people living inside. It didn't explain the energy of the system. To understand that, you had to understand the language of Ayurveda. Sushruta was not just a surgeon, he was a Vaidya, a complete physician. His surgical skills were one part of a vast holistic system of medicine, and the operating system for that entire system, the theory that explained everything from a common cold to a fit of rage to a wound that refused to heal, was the Tridosha, the three doshas. You've probably heard of these. It's a concept that has trickled down into modern wellness culture, often simplified into a "which dosha are you?" quiz. But here in the ashram, this isn't a personality test. This is the fundamental, non-negotiable science of life. This is the mainstream canonical fact upon which all of Indian medicine is built. The Samhita explains that all of existence, including the human body, is composed of the Pancha Mahabhutas, the five great elements: earth, Prithvi; water, Jala; fire, Agni; wind, Vayu; and ether, space, Akasha. The doshas are the three primary functional principles that arise from these elements. They are the forces that govern the body. You see a student explaining this to a new patient using his hands to illustrate. First he says there is Vata. This is the principle of movement, born of ether and wind. Vata is the force that moves your blood, your food through your gut, your breath in and out of your lungs, and your very thoughts through your mind. It is the nervous system, the kinetic energy, the mover of everything. An imbalanced Vata, as you might guess, leads to anxiety, dryness, erratic pain, and tremors. Second, he explains, there is Pitta. This is the principle of transformation or metabolism, born of fire and water. Pitta is the fire that digests your food, the light that allows you to understand an idea, the heat in your body and the burning of inflammation. It is the processor. An imbalanced Pitta, naturally, manifests as anger, inflammation, ulcers, fever, and skin rashes. Third, there is Kapha. This is the principle of structure and lubrication, born of water and earth. Kapha is the stuff you are made of. It is the fluid in your joints, the mucus that protects your stomach, the solidity of your bones, and the oils that keep your skin soft. It is your physical foundation, your immunity. An imbalanced kapha leads to congestion, lethargy, swelling, and weight gain. Health, the student explains, is the balance of these three. Every person has a unique, natural-born balance, their prakriti. Illness or vikriti is a state of imbalance. This is where it gets critical for surgery. A surgeon's job, in Sushruta's eyes, was not just to cut and stitch. It was to manage the doshas through that trauma. The act of surgery itself, the shalya, was a massive, violent disruption. The cut of the knife would, by its very nature, enrage Vata, the pain, the shock, the disturbance, and provoke Pitta, the bleeding, the inevitable inflammation. A good surgeon knew this. So the operation didn't begin on the table. It began days before, with a dosha assessment. Is the patient too Pitta heavy? Too inflamed and angry? The surgery will be a disaster. The wound will swell and erupt. He must first be cooled with specific herbs and a cooling diet. Is the patient too Vata? A bundle of nerves and anxiety? He will go into deep shock on the table. He must be grounded and oiled first, and this brings us to the quirky, fractal-like complexity of the system. Sushruta didn't just identify three doshas, that was the entry level. His Samhita subclassifies them, breaking them down into 5 types of each. There wasn't just Vata. There was Pranavata, governing the head and breath, Apana Vata, governing downward excretion, Udana Vata, governing speech, and so on. A true master could pinpoint exactly which subdosha was out of balance. It's a level of obsessive classification that makes modern medicine look, well, a little simple by comparison. Historians, of course, have a field day with this. They still argue whether the doshas were understood as literal, physical substances. Was kapha just phlegm? Was pitta just bile? Or as abstract, metaphorical principles of function? The answer, especially for a surgeon like Sushruta, is both. When he lanced a kapha abscess, he was draining a literal physical substance, but when he prescribed a pitta-pacifying diet of cool rice and milk to the noseless man to prevent inflammation, he was treating an abstract, energetic principle. He was bilingual. He spoke the language of the physical body, flesh, bone, and the language of the functional body, doshas, at the same time, seeing no contradiction. The doshas were the invisible enemy. The surgeon wasn't just fighting the visible wound, he was fighting the imbalance that the wound would inevitably create. This is why his post-operative care was so meticulous. The surgery was just the carpentry, the post-op care was the healing, and that required a deep, abiding respect for cleanliness. That battle against the unseen doshas, the invisible energies of vata, pitta, and kapha, was the software side of the operation. But Sushruta was just as obsessed with the hardware side, the physical environment. You simply cannot balance the body's internal energy if you are simultaneously introducing external, well, filth. And it is here, in his almost pathological obsession with cleanliness, that Sushruta makes the leap from ancient healer to modern-feeling scientist. You've already seen it in action. The Shalyagriha, the operating room, fumigated with antiseptic herbs. The surgeon and his students washed and in clean white cotton. The tools polished, flame-sterilized, and laid on a clean silk cloth. The wound itself, washed before and after. This is not just a casual suggestion. This is a protocol. This is the core of Shalya Tantra. And it is so far ahead of its time, it is almost dizzying. To give you some context, you need to jump forward in your mind. Think of a medieval European battlefield. Think of the surgeon, the barber surgeon, his apron stained with the blood of the last 10 men, wiping his unwashed knife on his boot before plunging it into the next. Think of the hospitals of 18th century Paris, where patients lay 3 to a bed wallowing in their own waste, where surgeons operated in their street clothes and prided themselves on the good surgical stink of their frock coats, stiff with dried blood and pus. That was the standard for millennia. Now, look back at this ashram in 800 BC. Sushruta is teaching that pus, puya, is not a laudable sign of healing, as Europeans would believe for 2,000 years. He is teaching that it is a complication. He is teaching that wounds must be kept clean and dry. This is the central, mainstream fact of his system. He had an empirical, if not theoretical, understanding of asepsis. He didn't know what germs were, but he knew what they did. He observed with his scientist's eyes that when wounds were contaminated with dirt or dust or touched by unwashed hands, they rotted. He didn't need a microscope. He just needed to pay attention. He attributed this rotting to invisible agents of disease which he may have called Buddhas or Rakshasas, demons. It's a fringe idea only in that he was fighting an invisible enemy. To him, these demons were as real as the wound itself. And his fumigation, that burning of neem, mustard, and googaloo, was not just a sweet-smelling ritual. It was chemical warfare against these invisible, infection-causing demons. This obsession extended to the surgeon's person. And here is the quirky, almost endearing tidbit. The Samhita gives specific instructions for the surgeon's personal presentation. It wasn't enough to just wash your hands. The surgeon, it dictates, must have his hair and fingernails cut short. Think about that. He knew that gunk hid under the fingernails. He knew that long hair could shed things into an open wound. He commands that the surgeon wear clean, white, fragrant garments. Why? Because it showed respect, but also because you can see if a white garment is dirty. It's a built-in hygiene check. But he goes one step further, linking the physical and the psychological. He also insists that the surgeon must enter the Shalyagriha with a calm and confident mind. He must be free from anxiety, hunger, or thirst. Why? Because Sushruta believed the surgeon's own doshas, his own mental state, could be transmitted to the patient. A shaky, anxious surgeon would create an anxious, vata-disturbed wound. In his world, your mood was a potential contaminant. This, of course, is where the debate lies. Historians still argue whether Sushruta's concept of asepsis was based on a true, pre-germ theory understanding of infection, or if it was purely a matter of ritual purity. In the Vedic worldview, cleanliness, shaucha, is a religious and spiritual imperative, a prerequisite for any sacred act. Was washing his hands a medical act, to remove the demons of rot, or was it a priestly act, to purify himself before the sacred ritual of surgery? The answer, as with the doshas, is almost certainly both. He was a physician-priest. He saw no difference. Performing a sacred ritual required physical cleanliness, and performing surgery was a sacred ritual. The demons of infection and the demons of spiritual impurity were, to him, the same thing. By purifying his body and his space for the gods, he was, in the same stroke, creating a sterile field. It is the ultimate two-for-one deal. You watch the students now, after the farmer with the ant head stitches has been treated. They are not just tossing the used bloody rags in a pile, they are being collected. The Samhita gives instructions for this too. All surgical waste must be properly disposed of, burned or buried far from the ashram's water source. It's a complete 360-degree system of sanitation, from the surgeon's fingernails to his trash pit. This is the foundation that makes the whole enterprise possible. Without it, his new noses wouldn't heal. They would just fall off in a puddle of sepsis. The noseless man, his face now a cartography of sutures and bandages, is not simply sent on his way. He cannot go back to the dusty, chaotic streets of Kashi. The Samhita would consider that a death sentence. The surgery, that act of profound violence and artistry, was only the first step. The second, and arguably more difficult journey is the one that begins now. The recovery. You watch as he is moved from the Shalyagriha. He is not taken to a large open ward, but to a Vranagriha, a wound house or recovery room. It is like the operating room, meticulously clean and quiet. The Samhita is specific. It should be spacious, well ventilated, but not drafty, and critically, auspicious. This means it's fumigated with the same antiseptic herbs, and the atmosphere is kept calm and positive. The patient is laid on a clean bed, his head propped up. He is in shock, exhausted, and as the wine and hemp begin to wear off, he is in a world of throbbing, agonizing pain. For the first day, his only prescription is rest. He is likely given more wine, more bhang, to keep him in a dull, manageable stupor. He is not given food. His body has just endured a trauma equivalent to a major battle, and his agni, the digestive fire that governs all transformation, is almost extinguished. To give him a heavy meal now would be, in Sushruta's view, like trying to light a bonfire with a single, damp match. It's not just pointless, it's dangerous. But on the second or third day, when the initial shock has passed and a flicker of Agni returns, the Vaidya begins the most critical phase of healing, the Samsarjana Krama, the graded diet. This is the central, mainstream fact of all Ayurvedic recovery. Food is medicine, and the wrong food is poison. The patient's diet will be controlled with a precision that would make a modern hospital nutritionist weep with envy. He will not be eating hospital food. He will be eating a prescription. It begins with the absolute simplest thing the body can process. A student brings him a small bowl of paya. This is a thin rice water gruel. It's little more than the water that rice was boiled in, perhaps with a pinch of salt. It is warm, hydrating, and light. In dosha terms, it gently pacifies vata, calming the nervous system, and provides a tiny bit of kapha, substance, without making any demands on the non-existent digestive fire. He will have only this for perhaps a day. The Vaidya will check on him, observing his energy, his color, his tongue, and his digestion. Is he processing it? Is his Agni returning? If so, he graduates. The next step is vilepi. This is a thicker rice gruel, more of a porridge. The rice is cooked to a complete structureless mush. It's still bland, still warm, but it has more substance. The body is now being asked to do a little more work. If he tolerates the vilepi, he moves on. Now, protein is introduced, but in its most gentle form. He is given yusha, which is a thin, clear medicinal soup made from mudga, or mung lentils. You know this as mung dal. This isn't a thick, spicy curry. It's the water of the mung, strained and perhaps boiled with a pinch of ginger or black pepper to help enkindle that digestive fire. This is the first building block. The body, desperate for protein to repair the massive wound on his face, is finally getting the raw materials, but in a pre-digested, easy-to-absorb form. Finally, after several more days, he graduates to real food, or at least ashram real food. He is given krishara. This is the ancestor of the modern comfort food khichdi, a soft, mushy, semi-solid porridge of rice and lentils cooked together. It is a perfect, complete food, providing carbohydrates and protein in one digestible, warm, and comforting bowl. This will be his diet for weeks. And here is the quirky, almost frustrating tidbit. The list of what he cannot eat is far, far longer than the list of what he can. The Samhita is a strict master. The patient must avoid all heavy foods, like meat or cheese, all guru, heavy vegetables, all fried foods, all amla, sour foods like yogurt, and all katu, pungent spices. Why? These foods all provoke pitta. Pitta is fire and inflammation. The last thing you want on your freshly sutured face is a raging inferno of inflammation. His diet is, by design, anti-inflammatory. It is bland, it is warm, it is sweet. In the Ayurvedic, not sugary sense. It is frankly boring, but it is healing. This is where you find a fascinating scholarly debate. Milk and ghee. The Samhita and other Ayurvedic texts are full of praise for milk and grita, ghee or clarified butter, as the ultimate rasayanas, life-building, rejuvenating substances. The patient would likely have his krishara served with a spoonful of ghee, and he might be given warm milk boiled with turmeric. Historians and modern nutritionists still argue about this. Was this high-fat, nourishing diet the key to these incredible recoveries, providing the calories and good fats needed for cell repair? Or, as a modern anti-dairy perspective might argue, was it mucus forming, increasing kapha in a way that could lead to congestion and slow the healing? In 800 BC, this is not a debate. It is a fact. Ghee is life. It is the ultimate oiling agent for a body ravaged by the drying wind of vata. The diet is just one part. The Samhita also lays out a lifestyle. The patient is forbidden from sleeping during the day. It makes the doshas heavy. He is forbidden from excessive talking. It wastes prana, or life force, and aggravates vata. He is absolutely forbidden from sexual activity, seen as a catastrophic drain on oyas, the body's core vitality. He must only be exposed to pleasant sounds and pleasant thoughts. The students will literally sit with him, telling calming, auspicious stories. His mind is being kept as clean as his wound. Recovery is a total, 24-hour, holistic prescription. The surgeon fixed his face, but this warm, bland, monitored life is what will make it his face again. The noseless man, now just the patient, is safe in his quiet recovery room. He is living proof of Sushruta's most famous, most artistic procedure. His world is a small, calm bubble of rice gruel, antiseptic pastes, and the low murmur of students telling auspicious stories. It would be easy to stand in this ashram and believe that this is what they do. They fix faces, they mend ears. They are the ancient guild of reconstructive artists, but you would be dangerously wrong. That is just the work that walks out and tells its story. The ashram has a much darker, more urgent, and far more dangerous function. You walk past the Vranagriha, the recovery house, to another, more imposing building. This one is also clean, but the atmosphere is different. It's not calm. You hear a sound, a low, rhythmic, terrible groaning. This isn't the shock and whine moan of the operating table. This is the sound of chronic, unendurable pain. You look inside. A man is curled on a mat, his body rigid, his face slick with sweat. He is not a victim of a king's justice. He is a victim of his own body. He is suffering from Ashmari, the enemy. Today we call it a bladder stone. In this part of the world, with a diet heavy in certain grains and minerals, and water that could be of variable quality, bladder stones were a common and agonizing affliction. It was a life-ending condition. The pain was constant. It blocked the flow of urine, leading to kidney failure, uremia, and a slow, agonizing death. These patients didn't come to Sushruta for their pride. They came for their lives. And Sushruta, in his quest to solve all of the body's failures, had developed a procedure for this too. This is the mainstream fact, a procedure so daring it boggles the mind. Ashmari Harana, the surgical removal of the stone. This is not surface work. This is internal, invasive surgery into one of the most dangerous, infection-prone areas of the body, performed without antibiotics and on a conscious patient. The man is finally taken to the Shalyagriha. He is given the same massive dose of wine and hemp. He is held down. But the position is different. He is not laid flat. The Samhita describes a specific posture. The patient is made to lie on his back, his knees drawn up to his chest, his wrists bound to his ankles. This is the lithotomy position, the posture still used in modern gynecology and urology, and it gets its name from this very procedure, the removal of a litho, stone. The surgeon, Sushruta himself, has, as you know, short, clean fingernails. The Samhita gives a chilling reason why this surgeon's nails must be closely clipped and sharp. He's going to use them. Sushruta washes his hands. He then lubricates his left index and middle fingers, perhaps with ghee or a medical oil. He inserts them into the patient's rectum. He presses upward, feeling for the bladder through the thin rectal wall. With his right hand, he presses down firmly on the patient's lower abdomen, trapping the bladder between his two hands. He pushes, prods, and milks the bladder until he feels it. A hard, distinct stone-like mass. He skillfully maneuvers this stone from outside the bladder, pushing it down toward the perineum, the area between the anus and the scrotum. He has now, with just his hands, isolated the stone and pinned it against the perineal wall. Then, he takes his scalpel, and he cuts. He makes a lateral incision to the side of the midline, avoiding the central structures. He cuts through the skin, the fat, and straight into the bladder, which he has pinned in place with his fingers on the inside. He cuts down until his scalpel grates against the stone. Then, using a specialized yantra, a stone forceps or scoop, he reaches in through the incision and with a twist pulls the enemy out. The whole procedure is over in minutes. It has to be. The patient is screaming. The risk of blood loss is immense. The student immediately presses a pad of antiseptic-soaked linen against the wound. There is no suturing. The wound, the Samhita dictates, is to be left open to drain, packed with healing pastes and herbs. And here lies the great, terrifying scholarly debate. Historians still argue about the survival rate of this operation. Did it work? The Samhita presents it as a standard procedure, but we, with our modern knowledge, can only see the catastrophic risks. The primary danger wasn't the cut itself. It was the 3 F's: fistula, fecal incontinence, and fatal sepsis. The cut was right next to the rectum. A minor slip, a cut too deep, and you've created a permanent leaking hole between the bladder and the rectum, a condition that is a living nightmare. You've almost certainly severed the nerves controlling the anal sphincter, and you've just cut into the urinary tract, a direct highway for bacteria, in a non-sterile field. Death from peritonitis or urosepsis seems almost guaranteed. And yet, the Samhita confidently describes it. This suggests that some must have survived. Perhaps the aggressive herbal antibiotics and the leave it open to drain technique were just enough to give the body a fighting chance. But the text doesn't stop there. This is the truly quirky part. This book is a complete catalog of human misery. Sushruta also details Badodara, intestinal obstruction. He describes how to recognize it: vomiting, distension, no bowel movements, and, chillingly, how to operate. He describes laparotomy, surgically opening the entire abdomen to find the knotted or obstructed loop of bowel. He even describes how to resew the intestine, using those anthead staples you saw before closing the belly. He describes hernia repair. He describes garbamuda, or obstructed labor, detailing how to manually turn a baby in the womb, and, if the fetus is dead, how to perform a craniotomy, crushing the skull, to save the mother. This is the abyss of ancient surgery. It is a world of heroic, desperate, and terrifying choices. The man with the bladder stone may die from the cure, but he was definitely dying from the disease. Sushruta was a man who was willing to try. The man with the bladder stone has been moved to the recovery ward. He is alive. He has survived a procedure that feels, to your modern mind, like a coin flip with death. You are left with the impression that this ashram is a place of blood, agony, and last-ditch, heroic measures. It is the ancient world's trauma center, a place of loud, terrible pain. But then, you see another patient, waiting in the quiet shade of the mango tree. It's an old woman, her hair a fine white crown. She is not groaning. She is not in pain. She is, however, just as trapped as the man with the stone. She is blind. She is being led by her young grandson, her hand resting on his shoulder. Her eyes are open, but they are not clear. Behind her pupil, where you should see a dark void, you see a milky, cloudy film. This is Timira, or Linganasha. We call it a cataract. In the bright, unrelenting sun of India, the clouding of the lens with age was, and is, incredibly common. For this woman, the world has slowly dissolved, fading from vivid color into a watery, smoky, and finally, an impenetrable white fog. She cannot see her grandson's face. She cannot see the path in front of her. She is as much a prisoner as the man who could not pass urine. She too has come to Sushruta for a miracle, and Sushruta has a procedure for this. It is one of the most delicate, terrifying, and precise operations described in the entire Samhita. It is cataract couching. She is not taken to the Shalyagriha with the same sense of desperate urgency. This is a planned procedure. The Samhita advises that it be done on a clear, sunny morning, when the light is perfect. The woman is seated, given her dose of wine and hemp, but the goal is calmness, not oblivion. She must, to some degree, cooperate. A student gently, firmly, holds her head against a post. She is told to look straight ahead. Sushruta sits before her. He washes his hands. He selects his tool. This is not the leaf-shaped scalpel or the lion-mouthed forceps. This is a shalaka, a specialized probe or needle. And here is the quirky, brilliant tidbit. The Samhita describes a specific one for this job, the Yavavaktra. This means barley corn-shaped. It is a small, fine, bronze needle, but the tip is not a sharp point. It's tapered like a single grain of barley, sharp enough to pierce but with a slight belly to it. Sushruta, with the sun at his back, peers at the woman's eye. The Samhita is exact about what he must do. He is to find a very specific spot. He must target the natural aperture, the Devakritachidra, on the white of the eye. He must avoid the cirrus, blood vessels. He must be half a finger's breadth from the black of the cornea and a quarter of a finger's breadth from the outer corner of the eye. This is not guesswork. This is anatomy. He takes a breath. He instructs the woman to look at his nose. His hand is rock steady, and he pushes the Yavavaktra needle in. He pierces the sclera, the tough white outer layer of the eye. He advances the needle into her eyeball. He pushes it in behind the iris until he feels it touch the milky, kapha-like mass of the lens. He has, in essence, just inserted a bronze needle into a living, conscious person's eye. This is not the part of the show for the squeamish. Now, the couching. With a deft, controlled flick of his wrist, he dislodges the lens. He uses the barleycorn tip to push the entire cloudy lens off its moorings, down and back, couching it into the vitreous humor, the jelly that fills the bottom of the eyeball, out of the line of sight, forever. He holds it there for a moment, then slowly, carefully withdraws the needle. The woman blinks. The pupil, once a milky white, is now a dark, clear, beautiful black. He covers her other eye. "Can you see?" he whispers. He holds up his hand. The woman's own hand flies to her mouth. She gasps. She can see. She can see shapes. She can see light. She can see the outline of his face. It is a miracle. But this is where the great scholarly debate begins. Historians and ophthalmologists still argue about what success meant here. Was this a cure? Or was it just trading one form of blindness for another? Sushruta had cured the opacity. The fog was gone. But he had also removed the lens. The lens is what focuses light. This woman was now a phakic. She had the vision of someone who has just taken off the thickest pair of reading glasses in the world. She would be profoundly farsighted, her world clear, but a blurry, unfocused mess, especially up close. It's a bit of a good news, bad news situation. The good news is, you can see again. The bad news is you're going to need reading glasses, which won't be invented for another 2,000 years. But we are judging it by our standards. For the woman who lived in an impenetrable white void, this blurry, unfocused but bright new world was a revelation. She could navigate her home. She could see the shape of her grandson. She was independent again. It wasn't a cure in our modern sense, where we replaced the lens with a new one. It was a trade, and it was the best trade in the world. The post-operative care is, as you can guess, intense. The eye is bandaged, often with a cotton pledget soaked in grita, ghee, to soothe and protect it. The patient is instructed to lie perfectly still in a dark room for several days. She is forbidden from coughing, sneezing, spitting, or any sudden movement that could cause the pressure to pop the lens right back up into place. This must have been the most nerve-wracking don't sneeze challenge in human history. This profound, delicate, life-altering knowledge. It's all here, in this ashram. But knowledge, especially knowledge this powerful, is a restless thing. It doesn't like to stay in one place. And as you watch the woman weep with joy, you can almost feel the first slow vibrations of this wisdom beginning its long journey out of India. You're standing in an ashram in 800 BC, watching a woman see the sky for the first time in a decade. You've seen a man's face rebuilt from his own forehead. You've seen a surgeon with his bare hands pull a stone from a living bladder. This is not just medicine, this is a body of knowledge so profound, so powerful, and so practical that it borders on the magical. And knowledge like this has a life of its own. It's like water. It doesn't want to stay in one place. It will always find a crack, a channel, a way to flow downhill to wherever there is a thirst for it. Here in Kashi, this knowledge is a closely guarded, sacred trust, passed from guru to shishya with a solemn oath. But the world is bigger than this one ashram. And the ashram is not a sealed box. It sits on the banks of the Ganga, in one of the busiest, most well-connected cities in the ancient world. Kashi is a major hub on the Uttarapatha, the northern road, the great highway that connects all of northern India, and which, in turn, connects to the other, even longer roads that lead west. The knowledge begins to travel. It doesn't travel in a book, not at first. Those delicate palm leaf manuscripts are not made for a long, rough journey. They would crumble in the desert heat or rot in the damp of a sea voyage. No, the knowledge travels the way it was meant to travel, inside a human brain. A merchant from Persia, whose son has a badly healed wound, hears a rumor about the surgical masters of Kashi. He travels for months, sees their work, and begs a junior Vaidya to return with him to the court of his king for a reward of gold. A Greek philosopher, wandering the world in search of all knowledge, sits with the students under the banyan tree and trades his ideas of the four humors for their ideas of the three doshas. A Buddhist pilgrim on his way to India to find enlightenment falls ill, is cured by a Vaidya from Sushruta's school, and is so amazed by the medical system that he spends an extra year memorizing the core texts to take back home. This is the slow filter. It's an osmosis of ideas carried by individuals, spreading along the trade routes that are the veins of the ancient world. But soon this slow word-of-mouth transmission will become a flood. We jump forward a few centuries to the Sasanian Empire in Persia. The kings there, particularly at the Academy of Gandhi-Shapur, have an insatiable, state-sponsored appetite for knowledge. They are actively collecting the wisdom of the world. They invite Greek scholars fleeing Christian persecution. They invite Syriac texts, and crucially, they invite Indian physicians. They bring their Vedyas and their texts. It is here, in this great multicultural melting pot of an academy, that the Sushruta Samhita is first discussed, debated and probably translated into Persian, sitting on a shelf right next to the works of Galen. But the real explosion happens with the rise of the Islamic Golden Age. When the Abbasid Caliphate, centered in Baghdad, conquered this region, they did something remarkable. They didn't just conquer the land, they inhaled the knowledge. The caliphs, like Harun al-Rashid, the caliph from 1001 Nights, founded the Bayt al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. It was a translation factory, a university, and a library all in one. And their mission was to translate all the world's important knowledge into Arabic. This is the single greatest mainstream fact of this knowledge's journey. In the 8th century AD, the Sushruta Samhita was formally translated into Arabic. It was given the name Kitab-i-Susrud, or Kitab Shah Shun al-Hindi, the Book of Sushruta the Indian. It was not a rumor anymore. It was a book. It was in the library. And it electrified the physicians of the Islamic world. Men like al-Razi, Razis, and the great Ibn Sina, Avicenna, read it. When you read their medical encyclopedias, like Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, which would become the medical Bible of Europe for 500 years, you can see Sushruta's DNA everywhere. The detailed descriptions of surgical tools, the methodical instructions for lithotomy, stone removal, the precise step-by-step technique for couching a cataract, and most famously, the Indian method of rhinoplasty. It was all there, absorbed, refined, and commented upon, now in Arabic. And here's the quirky fringe connection. The Arab and Persian physicians were especially fascinated by the Indian pharmacopoeia, particularly the sections on toxicology, antidotes, and yes, the use of vijaya, cannabis, and datura, as surgical anesthetics. They took this knowledge of herbal sedation and refined it, developing their own soporific sponges, which were sponges soaked in a potent cocktail of cannabis, opium, and henbane. A patient would inhale the fumes, fall into a deep stupor, and then the surgery would begin. It was the next great leap in pain management, built directly on the foundation Sushruta had laid. Of course, historians still argue about the purity of this transmission. How much of Avicenna's canon is directly from the Kitab-i-Susrud, and how much of it was a parallel evolution, a general soup of Greco-Roman, Persian, and Indian ideas that had been mingling for so long? No one could trace the original source. It's a valid question. But the Indian method for the nose is the smoking gun. It's too specific, too unique. That knowledge, that forehead flap, traveled in a straight line from Kashi to Baghdad. And from Baghdad, it would travel to the great Moorish centers of learning in Spain, and to the first medical schools in Italy, where it would be translated again, this time from Arabic into Latin. By the time a 13th century European surgeon read about a clever method for rebuilding a nose, he would be reading a Latin translation of an Arabic text, which was a translation of a Persian discussion, of a Sanskrit original. The source was now completely invisible. Sushruta the man was lost, but his knowledge was conquering the world. But what, in all this time, was happening back home? As the world was discovering the Samhita, what was happening in India itself? You turn your gaze back to the ashram and you feel a change in the air. A new wind is blowing. The knowledge is bleeding out. A slow, steady stream, flowing west to Baghdad and beyond. It's a proud export, a testament to the genius you've witnessed. But as you stand in the ashram courtyard, a place that once felt like the center of the medical universe, you feel a subtle, unsettling shift. The energy is fading. The confident, empirical buzz of the Shalyagriha is being replaced by the louder, more insistent hum of the other students, the ones in the herb garden, the ones memorizing verses on diet, the ones debating the 5 subtypes of Vata. The surgical wing, the heart of Sushruta's revolution, is becoming quieter. The master is still revered, his Samhita still chanted as a sacred, perfect text, but the practice of surgery, the willingness to take the knife to get blood on those clean white garments, that is what's beginning to wane. You are witnessing the long, slow twilight of the Shalya Tantra in its own homeland. What happens? How does the father of surgery end up losing custody of his own child? The first answer is the one that changes everything. Ahimsa, non-violence, This concept, always present in Indian philosophy, is about to become a dominant cultural force, championed by two new, massively influential movements, Buddhism and Jainism. These new philosophies place ahimsa at the absolute center of a moral life. The highest virtue is to cause no harm to any living thing. And this creates a terrible, profound paradox for the surgeon. How can you be a moral person, a person seeking moksha or nirvana, when your entire job is based on the himsa, violence, of the scalpel? The students, once proud to be part of a hands-on, life-saving craft, now hesitate. Does cutting a man, even to save him from a bladder stone, create bad karma? Does it stain the soul? And that queasiness about the living is paired with a renewed, more rigid revulsion for the dead. Remember Sushruta's grim, brilliant workaround for anatomy? The body in the river? That was already pushing the boundaries of ritual purity. In this new, more scrupulous era, that practice becomes unthinkable. It is no longer a necessary exception. It is a defilement, a sacrilege. The ashram stops the practice, and with it, the book of the human body is closed. How can you teach a student to perform a lithotomy when he has never ever seen a human bladder? How can he couch a cataract when he doesn't know the anatomy of the eye? The Samhita becomes a theory book. The surgery chapters are memorized but not practiced. They are dead letters. This brings us to the quirky, structural shift. As surgery becomes more taboo, more dirty, it falls victim to the increasing rigidity of the caste system. In Sushruta's time, the Vaidya was a high caste, elite scholar who was also a craftsman. He could recite the Vedas and sew a man's face. But now that combination is splitting apart. The high Vaidya will no longer pollute himself with the physical bloody work. He will diagnose, he will prescribe herbs, he will balance the doshas, he will be a physician. So who does the cutting? The dirty work is pushed down, out of the ashram, and into the hands of the lower castes. The knowledge fragments. The high art of rhinoplasty, for example, becomes the secret, hereditary craft of the Kumas, the potter caste, who passed the skill down from father to son for generations. Bone setting, that other hands-on skill, becomes the specialty of barbers who were already handy with a blade. And cataract couching, that becomes the domain of itinerant, wandering couchers, with no ashram training, who would travel from village to village, needle in hand, with a 50-50 success rate. The Shalya Tantra is still there, but it's been dismembered and scattered. No longer a unified science, but a collection of folk tricks. And then, there's the competition. As you move forward through the centuries, India is not a closed system. Remember the knowledge that flowed out? Now, new knowledge is flowing in. With the arrival of Muslim rule, starting in the 11th and 12th centuries, comes a new, powerful and sophisticated medical system, Unani, Greco-Arabic medicine, the medicine of Avicenna and Al-Razi, which ironically already contains the DNA of Sushruta's work. The Hakims, Unani practitioners, set up their own schools, their own madrasas. They are patronized by the new sultans and emperors. They are, like the Vaidyas, brilliant diagnosticians and pharmacists. And they too have a deep aversion to invasive surgery. They follow the Hippocratic tradition. First, do no harm. The knife is a last brutal resort. So now you have two great elite medical traditions in India, Ayurveda and Unani, both of which treat surgery as a lesser, polluting, and failed art. The real genius, they both agree, is to cure with a potion, not a blade. This, of course, is a massive debate. Historians still argue whether the decline of Indian surgery was an inside job, caused by ahimsa and caste purity, or an outside job, caused by the repeated destabilizing invasions of the Hunas, Turks and others that shattered the old kingdoms and destroyed the great universities like Nalanda. Was it a cultural choice to abandon the knife? Or was the fragile scholarly ecosystem required for this high surgery simply wiped out by centuries of war, with its brain drain and destroyed libraries? The truth is likely a tragic combination of both. You look around the ashram one last time. It's 1700 AD. The building is still here, but it's different. The Shalya Griha is a storeroom for drying herbs. The students are all arguing about the doshas in the most minute, metaphysical detail. the beautiful animal-headed bronze yantras and shastras. They are in a locked wooden box, buried under a pile of old manuscripts. They are an antiquity, a relic. The knowledge is asleep, but it's not dead, and it's about to get a very, very rude awakening. The ashram dissolves. The dusty, incense-filled air of 800 BC fades, replaced by something sharper, something metallic. You smell gunpowder, damp wool, and the unmistakable, slightly sour scent of a military encampment. The world fast-forwards, a blur of centuries. The small kingdoms, the Mahajanapadas, have been replaced by the vast Mughal Empire, and that too has fractured. Now a new power is in the land, a power that arrived on tall ships, armed with cannons and contracts. You are in India, but it's the 1790s. The British East India Company is no longer just a group of merchants. It is a rapacious military corporate state, fighting a series of brutal wars to bring the subcontinent under its control. You find yourself in a British military camp somewhere near the city of Pune, modern next Pune. The air is tense. This is the era of the Anglo-Mysore Wars, a bloody conflict between the company and the formidable Tipu Sultan, the Tiger of Mysore. The surgeons here are British attached to the army. They are men of their time. They are good at amputating limbs shattered by cannonballs. They know how to bleed a man for a fever, and they are masters of the heroic purge. But they are not plastic surgeons. If a soldier's face is ruined by a saber cut, he is simply ruined. He is sent home a monster to frighten children. The art of rebuilding a face is, to them, a lost art, a myth from the time of the Romans. In a small, clean tent, two of these surgeons, a Mr. Thomas Crusoe and a Mr. James Findlay, are standing, arms crossed. They are here to observe a native curiosity. They have been told by a local merchant that a man is to have his face restored, and they've come to have a good skeptical laugh at the local quackery. This is the mainstream fact. The British, at this point, had a deep and abiding contempt for most native Indian medicine. They saw the Vaidyas and Hakims as superstitious, their dosha and humor theories as primitive nonsense. They had come to teach, not to learn. A man is brought in and sits on a low stool. He is an Indian, but he wears the jacket of a company cart driver. His name is Kawashji. He is a Maratha and his story is grim. He was captured by Tipu Sultan's forces. Because he was working for the British, he was branded a traitor, and he received the standard punishment for such a crime. The same punishment you saw in the town square in Kashi 2.5 millennia ago. His nose was cut off. He is a noseless man. The British surgeons look at him with a mixture of pity and clinical detachment. The wound is healed, but it is a grotesque, scarred hole. A cure is impossible. Then the surgeon enters, and Crusoe and Findlay are immediately taken aback. This is not a high-caste Vaidya, not a learned Hakim in silk robes. This is a local man, a native. He is from the Kumas caste. He is a potter. This is the quirky, unbelievable tidbit. The knowledge had not died in India. It had simply gone underground. It had been expelled from the high Brahmin ashrams as polluting and low work, but it was too useful to disappear. So, it survived for over 2,000 years, passed down not in a sacred text, but as a craft, a guarded family secret, within a caste of craftsmen, the potters, the men who knew how to shape things. The potter has no bronze tools. He has a simple, terrifyingly sharp steel razor, the kind a barber would use. He has no ashram. He is doing this in a clean part of a tent. He gives Kawaji a large draught of pang or arak, the local spirits, to dull his senses. Then, he begins. Crusoe and Findlay lean in, their skepticism turning to something else. Shock. Disbelief. The potter doesn't guess. He makes a wax model of a proper nose and then flattens it out. This is his pattern. He lays this pattern on Kawashji's forehead. He takes his razor and, in a few swift motions, he cuts the flap, just as Sushruta did, leaving it attached by a pedicle between the eyebrows. He freshens the edges of the nasal stump. He turns the flap down. He inserts 2 tubes, not of reed but of quills wrapped in lint, to form the nostrils. And then he begins to sew. He uses a fine needle and thread. His hands, calloused from the potter's wheel, moving with the steadiness of a master. The British surgeons are speechless. They are watching an ignorant native perform a procedure that the most educated, Royal Society fellow surgeons in London would have declared a fantasy. He is not using any magic. He is not chanting. He is performing a technical, anatomical, surgical operation. This, of course, is the great debate. Historians still argue about the true nature of this rediscovery. Was this knowledge, as the British would later claim, truly lost to the world and forgotten in India, surviving only in this one bizarre, hereditary lineage? Or was it never lost? Was it, in fact, practiced commonly, but in circles, the low-caste circles, that the British, with their high-caste sensibilities, simply never looked? The British only spoke to the Vaidyas, who had long since abandoned the knife. Of course they thought surgery was dead. They had been talking to the wrong people. The procedure is finished. The potter applies a simple herbal paste. He gives his instructions, and he leaves. Crusoe and Findlay stay watching Kawaji's recovery. They are not just curious now, they are riveted. They watch day by day as the flap lives. It turns pink. It heals. The stitches are removed. In a few weeks, Kawaji has a nose. It's a bit bulbous, it's scarred on the forehead, but it is a nose. He can breathe. He has his face back. Crusoe and Findlay know in that moment that they have just seen the future. They immediately sit down and write a letter, a very, very detailed letter with sketches to be published in London. The sleeping knowledge of Sushruta, kept alive by a cast of potters, has just collided with the modern world. And the world is about to be turned upside down. That letter, written in a tent in Pune, with its detailed sketches and its tone of breathless professional shock, is a spark. It travels on a fast company ship, a 6-month voyage around the Cape of Good Hope, and lands on a desk in London. In October of 1794, the account of Kawaji the cart driver is published for all to read in the Gentleman's Magazine, the most respectable, widely read periodical of the day. The effect is electric. The surgical establishment of London, men who prided themselves on being the most advanced, enlightened, and scientific physicians in the world, read it, and they are, to put it mildly, shocked. Their first reaction is disbelief. It's a traveler's tale, a colonial exaggeration. A potter, rebuilding a nose, from the forehead? It sounds like a party trick, not a serious surgical intervention. It's a bit uncivilized. But the letter is not a rumor. It's a witnessed, documented account, complete with illustrations, published for the medical record. The names of Crusoe and Findlay are known. The evidence is undeniable. The skepticism gives way to a stunned, fascinated, and slightly jealous curiosity. They have been struggling with this very problem for centuries. Soldiers returned from the Napoleonic Wars with their faces hacked apart by sabers. Civilians ravaged by the great pox, syphilis, would suffer a saddle-nose collapse, their faces caving in from the disease. The European solution? A prosthetic, a fake nose, made of silver or wood, painted flesh color, and strapped to the head with a leather cord. It was a mask, a polite fiction. It was not a cure, and now, this letter arrives, claiming that a native in a primitive country has a real cure. Most surgeons read it, find it fascinating, and go on with their day, back to their amputations and their bleedings. But one man, a brilliant, forward-thinking London surgeon named Joseph Constantine Carpuet, cannot get it out of his mind. He is intrigued, not dismissive. He sees not quackery, but a solution. He obtains the Gentleman's Magazine report, and he begins to study. This is the mainstream canonical fact of how plastic surgery arrives in the West. Carpuet is the bridge. But he is a cautious bridge. This is 1794. He doesn't just run out and try it the next day. He's a man of the Enlightenment, a man of science, and he is terrified of failure. If he tries this Indian method and it fails, if the flap rots and falls off, if the patient dies of sepsis, he will be a laughingstock. He will be the London quack who thought he was a potter. So he waits, he studies for 20 years, he reads the report 100 times. He practices on cadavers trying to replicate the potter's cuts. He's trying to deconstruct this magic trick, and turn it into a replicable, Western scientific procedure. Finally, in 1814, 2 decades after reading the letter, he is ready. He finds 2 patients, 2 perfect candidates. The first is a British Army officer whose nose had been destroyed, not by a sword, but by the cure for syphilis, the toxic mercury treatments that rotted the cartilage. The second is another soldier who had lost his nose in battle. He has their consent. The operations are scheduled at his hospital in Chelsea. The London Surgical Theatre is packed. The mood is tense. This is the great experiment. Carpue, following the potter's instructions to the letter, performs the operation. He cuts the flap from the forehead. He leaves the pedicle. He freshens the stump. He pivots the flap. He stitches it into place. He uses quills for the nostrils. He does exactly what the Kumas in Pune did, and it works. The flaps live. The patients heal. The men who had been hiding their faces in shame now have noses. They are not beautiful, perfect noses. They are bulbous, scarred, and strange. But they are noses. They are living, warm, breathing flesh. It is a triumph. Carpue, overnight, becomes a sensation. In 1816, he publishes his masterpiece, an account of 2 successful operations for restoring a lost nose from the integuments of the forehead. The book, with its detailed plates, becomes the founding textbook of Western plastic surgery. And here is the quirky and utterly critical tidbit: the name. Carpue never ever called this the Carpue method. He was a man of integrity. In his book and in all his lectures, he gave full, unambiguous credit. He called it, and it was forever known as, the Indian method or the Indian flap. The very name was a permanent back-it-in admission that this revolutionary Western technique was, in fact, a direct, 1-to-1 import from a 2,000-year-old Indian tradition kept alive by a caste of potters. This, of course, raises the debate. Historians still argue whether this was a true rediscovery, or if Carpue was just reviving a dormant European technique. They point to the 16th-century Italian surgeon, Gasparo Tagliacozzi, who also rebuilt noses. But Tagliacozzi's method was different. It was far, far more cumbersome. He would cut a flap from the patient's upper arm. Then he would sew it to the nasal stump. And then the patient would have to stay in that position with their arm strapped to their face for weeks or months, waiting for the flap to attach before the pedicle on the arm could be cut. It was a nightmare of immobilization, and the technique and the book it was in had been largely lost and dismissed as fantasy. Carpue's Indian method was a revelation because it was so simple. The flap was local. The blood supply was robust. The patient didn't need to be a contortionist. It was, in every way, a superior operation. The potter's method wasn't just a method, it was the method. Sushruta's ancient 800 BC insight was, it turned out, the most elegant and effective solution. The sleeping giant of the Samhita had just woken up, put on a British frock coat, and was about to found an entire new field of medicine. Carpue's 1816 publication, with its honest, grateful nod to the Indian method, wasn't just a book. It was a starting pistol. The knowledge that had slept for centuries, first in a box of bronze tools in a forgotten ashram, and then in the hereditary memory of a potter caste, was now loose in the most energetic, explosive, and frankly violent century in human history. The West had just been handed a surgical toolkit it barely understood, right on the cusp of an era that would desperately, tragically need it. The lineage is direct. Carpue's Indian flap becomes a standard, if niche, procedure. But it's a solution in search of a problem. And in 1914, that problem arrives. World War I, the Great War. This is the mainstream fact that solidifies Sushruta's legacy forever. The trenches of the Somme and Verdun were a new kind of hell, a hell of machine guns, shrapnel, and high explosives. It created a new kind of wounded. Men weren't just shot, their faces were, to use the grim slang of the day, obliterated. They were left without jaws, without noses, without cheeks. They were the gueules cassées, the broken faces of France. They were a generation of men who were too horrifying to be seen, and they were flooding the field hospitals. A brilliant, New Zealand-born surgeon stationed in Britain, Sir Harold Gillies, was tasked with this impossible, horrifying problem. He looked at the existing textbooks. amputation, cautery, nothing. Then he found Carpew's 1816 account. He found the Indian method. And for Gillies, it was a revelation. It was the key. He took Sushruta's 2,500-year-old concept of the pedicle flap, that a piece of living tissue kept alive by a lifeline could be moved, and he turned it into an art form. He didn't just use the forehead. He took flaps from the chest, the back, the arm. He invented the tube pedicle, a way of walking a flap of skin from a man's chest, up his neck, and onto his face over a series of operations, keeping it alive the whole time. He was, in every sense, the father of modern plastic surgery. But he was, as he freely admitted, standing on the shoulders of an Indian giant. The entire massive, life-restoring field of modern reconstructive surgery, the specialty that rebuilds a burn victim's skin, a car crash victim's face, or a cancer patient's jaw, was born in those trenches, from a seed that was planted in Kashi. When you see a modern surgeon today in a sterile white operating room performing a paramedian forehead flap to rebuild a nose lost to skin cancer, they are performing the Nasika Sandhana. They are, whether they know it or not, a student of Sushruta's school. And here is the quirky, beautiful tidbit. Look at their tools. A modern ophthalmic surgeon performing cataract surgery will use a tool set of microscopic needle-fine instruments. But look at the names. You will find the Sinsky hook, the Jaffe-Maltzman fax forceps, the Akahoshi pre-chopper. The tools are still named just as Sushruta's were, with a poetry of function. The Heronbeak forcep, the Kankamukha yantra, is the direct, philosophical ancestor of every specialized, single-purpose, delicate tool on that tray. The principle is identical. The hand must have an extension that is perfectly, beautifully designed for the task. And so, we are left with the final great debate. Historians and surgeons still argue about the true father of this science. Is it Sushruta, the originator who wrote the book? Is it Gasparo Tagliacozzi, the Italian pioneer who was ignored and forgotten? Is it Carpew, the bridge who brought the idea to the West? Or is it Gillies, the codifier who turned a single procedure into an entire medical field? The answer, as you've seen, is that it's not a person. It's a river. It's a single, continuous stream of knowledge. It began in the mists of 800 BC on the banks of the Ganga. It flowed into the desert sands, hiding in a potter's hands for 2,000 years. It crossed the ocean on a piece of paper, woke up in London and found its terrible, necessary purpose in the trenches of France. The man you saw in the ashram, his face a map of horsehair stitches, and the man Kawasji, his face held by the potter's thread, are the same patient. And the man in a hospital today, his skin grafted by a surgeon who trained at Johns Hopkins, he is that patient too. They are all in the end children of the Samhita. They are all proof that a single brilliant idea born of compassion and a steady defiant hand can be so powerful that it echoes through time long, long after the ashram and the man who built it have turned to dust. And so, our journey ends. We have to leave this place, this ashram of impossible genius. The scent of the neem and the guggulu smoke is fading now, replaced by the familiar quiet sounds of your own room. The story is over. You've seen how the sacred and the scientific, the brutal and the beautiful, all came together to restore that most basic, most human of things, a face. The students have finished their recitations. The master, Sushruta, has cleaned his tools and put them away in their silk-lined case. His work for a time was forgotten, but it was never ever truly lost. The Samhita is quiet now, the palm leaves at rest, but its echo is everywhere. It is in the steady hand of every surgeon who stitches a wound. It is in the clean, sterile field of every operating room. It is in the simple, profound knowledge that the body, when broken, can be remade. It is a promise written in Sanskrit that has been kept. The lights of the ashram are finally going out, but the knowledge they lit, that will burn forever.